My name is Emily. In my late 30s, I juggle a full-time office job with helping out at my family's liquor store. During weekdays, I work in the office until 6 p.m., then spend my evenings managing the accounts and operations at the store. Our liquor store was once a thriving business, supplying alcoholic beverages to hotel banquet halls, pubs, sushi restaurants, and more. We enjoyed a near monopoly in the neighborhood as there were no other liquor stores around. However, recent years have brought significant changes. New regulations limiting the hours alcohol can be served have drastically reduced consumption. Banquets have become rare and pubs have even stopped serving alcohol in the evenings. These changes have led to serious financial difficulties for our family business. As the eldest daughter, with my sister Noah already married, the responsibility of our struggling family liquor store fell on my shoulders. My parents were terrible at managing finances, and their outdated business practices only made things worse as the store's fortunes declined. The existing debt ballooned without us realizing, bringing us to the brink of bankruptcy. Determined not to close the store, my father refused to give up, so I decided to move back home 2 years ago to help. However, the income from the liquor store alone wasn't enough to cover our debts, so I continued my day job and assisted at the store in the evenings. Every weekday evening after my office job, I'd return home to find my father in the store, the shutters open, holding his favorite beer. "Ah, finally you're back," he'd say, greeting me with a hopeful smile. "Dad, are you drinking again?" "These bottles aren't selling. I'm just drinking them." My father, having consumed quite a bit of alcohol, reeked of it, and his speech was slurred. "Dad, that's enough. Don't drink the merchandise." He responded loudly, "Don't lecture me, the daughter who can't even get married." With that, he stumbled into the house. I cleaned the cluttered store and dived into the books for the day. Dinner didn't happen until after 9 p.m. when I finished the store's closing tasks. I'm used to it, but I still get hungry. Since my parents had already gone to bed, I headed to the kitchen to make instant ramen and started preparing breakfast for the next morning. My mom prefers bread for breakfast and my dad likes rice, so every day I prepare both a Western and Japanese meal. This is how my day ends. On the weekends, when I finally have a day off, I set my alarm for 10 a.m., hoping to sleep in. However, my mother wakes me up at 8 a.m. "Hey, heat up your father's miso soup quickly." "Why?" "You can do that, Mom." I refuse. "Why should I have to do the housework when you're here? Now get up." My mother seems to mistake me for a housemaid. True, I've always been meticulous and enjoyed cooking and cleaning, so I naturally took on the housework. But ever since high school, my mother, who came to rely heavily on me, dumped everything from taking care of my sister to housework on me. Fed up with this situation, I got a job and started the work I do now as soon as I graduated. In my teens, work was incredibly tough, and there were many times I wanted to give up. But each time, my seniors at work supported me, helping me to keep going. Unable to enjoy a leisurely morning, I would wake up, finish the housework, and go straight to work at the liquor store. I began shouldering the family debt when the business started to struggle, a total of $3 million a year. Frankly, it's not an easy sum to manage. I lived frugally to repay the debt, using only $1 cosmetics from the dollar store and packing homemade lunches. I endured the cold as long as I could to save on heating bills. In a bid to pull us out of this situation, I took it upon myself to help rebuild our family business. I believed that just supplying alcohol to local businesses wasn't going to cut it. I suggested to my dad that we leverage the internet, but he was resistant, saying, "Our old way is the best way. I'm not the problem, the world is." While I was deep in thought about the business, my mom would nudge me with household chores. "Is lunch ready yet? Did you hang the laundry?" Juggling these tasks left me with little time to devise and execute a plan to revitalize the business, always keeping me a step behind. After considerable effort, I successfully launched online sales using the internet, focusing on rare alcoholic beverages available at our store. With restrictions limiting people's movement, this treasure hunt-like approach to online sales became popular, and our business began to thrive. Simultaneously, our store's online presence attracted more foot traffic. My already limited free time dwindled further, leaving me with hardly any time to myself. I kept pushing forward, driven by the goal of alleviating my parents' debt. Finally, things were turning around, and my parents were becoming more financially stable. Around that time, I received the news. Noah's expecting a baby. "Congratulations. That's wonderful. A grandchild. I beamed with joy, but my mother's expression turned cold. That's why you need to leave this house. What? I couldn't comprehend what she was saying. Confused, I looked at my mom, and my dad, who had been eavesdropping with a drink in hand, chimed in. Noah and his wife will be moving in here. Pack your things and go. But I came back to take care of both of you. My pleas fell on deaf ears. My sister had always been carefree, rarely lifting a finger around the house. Despite her initial ambition to become a preschool teacher, she dropped out of college after just a few months, claiming boredom. Even after marrying, she continued to rely on our parents' financial support. Her husband's sporadic employment meant they lived off our parents' money and occasional part-time earnings, yet they seemed to enjoy a comfortable lifestyle, taking trips here and there. I had my suspicions but chose to ignore them. Suddenly being told to leave the house left me scrambling to find a new place. Busy as I was, I pleaded with my parents for at least 2 months' grace period. I put the liquor store work on hold and began the search for a new home. One day, my dad called my workplace. "Emily, what the hell are you doing? The store is too busy. Come home right now." "No, I'm at work." "Ask Noah," I replied, exasperated by his attempt to dump more responsibilities on me after telling me to leave home. Frustrated, I hung up the phone. A few minutes later, my boss approached me. "Emily, your father's on the phone again." "Again?" I apologized for the inconvenience, I said, picking up the phone. My father started repeating his earlier demands, his voice growing louder with each word. "Emily, you can leave early today if you need to," my boss offered, sensing the situation's urgency. Despite having work to finish, I didn't want my father's incessant calls to disturb the office any longer, so I decided to leave early that day. Arriving at our family liquor store, I found my father drinking, even though we were still open for business. "Drinking again instead of working?" I exclaimed, my frustration evident. He shrugged off my accusation. "Understanding the tastes of our products requires sampling," he insisted. "You focus on your tasks." Realizing I wouldn't get through to him in his current state, I quietly began attending to the family business duties. From that point on, I juggled my job, household tasks, house hunting, and the responsibilities of running the liquor store, living an unimaginably hectic life. Then, one day, the stress became too much. I collapsed at work and woke up in a hospital bed. Jason, my colleague who had come with me, explained that I had fainted, hitting my head on the corner of my desk. As I gently touched the bandages wrapped around my head, I felt relieved. "That was frightening. How are you feeling now?" "Better," I replied quietly. Tears welled up in my eyes at his kindness. Kindness had been a rare sight in my life over the past few years. At home, despite my efforts at the liquor store and with household chores, appreciation was scarce. Being constantly manipulated by my alcoholic father and self-centered mother had pushed me to my limits. Seeing me in this vulnerable state, Jason said, "You've worked incredibly hard. Soon, you won't have to worry about the house anymore. Let's take it easy from now on." Grateful for Jason's empathy, I nodded. Moving out was on the horizon. The thought of it gave me renewed strength to endure it a little longer. Finally, I found a house and began preparing to move out. Despite this, my parents incessantly nagged me to clean every nook and cranny of the house for my younger sister and her husband, who were moving in. Fed up with being the obedient daughter, I finally stood my ground. "Why don't you handle it yourselves? It's not my responsibility anymore." My retort seemed to catch my parents off guard. My father responded sharply, "What's with the attitude? We'll be glad to be rid of someone like you." I had reached my limit with my unappreciative parents who never acknowledged my efforts. After I completed my move, my sister and her husband settled into our parents' house, and I finally felt liberated from their grip. During the weekdays, I focused on work, typically home before 8 p.m. Weekends became a cherished time for sleeping in, leisurely walks, shopping, and reclaiming precious moments for myself. Each day was a newfound joy. Then, 1 month later, a phone call left me bursting into laughter. "What's going on with this month's debt payment?" It was my mother suddenly calling in anger. "Wait, a debt? Wasn't that created by you guys?" Despite all the effort I put into rebuilding the liquor store business and handling all the house chores, who was it that kicked me out for their convenience? I didn't give my mom a chance to respond. And in the background, Noah chimed in. "Please help us out. I had no idea about the debt. I thought the liquor store was thriving and I could have an easy life coming back home." His pleas continued, but life wasn't going to be that simple. All I could do was laugh at the self-centeredness of my family, now including my sister and her husband. 4 adults should be able to manage their finances, right? When I mentioned this, I could hear my mom and Noah arguing loudly on the other end of the phone. They hurled insults, blaming each other for their inaction, completely forgetting I was still on the line. The argument escalated for several minutes. As I listened, disappointment in my family deepened, strengthening my resolve to distance myself from them. My dad, constantly drinking and avoiding work. My mom, unwilling to handle household chores. Noah, preferring not to work and relying on her parents. And Noah's husband, equally uninterested in employment. With such an attitude among 4 adults, the income from the liquor store couldn't possibly cover the nearly $1,000 in monthly debt payments and living expenses. Fed up, I declared, I don't want to be involved anymore. By the way, I'm getting married soon and plan to move overseas in a few months. Don't rely on me anymore. Upon hearing this, my mom reacted hastily. Overseas? You must have a lot of money. Don't go overseas. Come back home. I reached my breaking point and hung up on her. They kept calling, but I refused to answer any more calls from my family. The next day, I changed my cell phone number and asked my workplace to block any calls intended for me. Being in America allowed me to create distance from my family, and with the support of those around me, I began to rebuild my life. Several months later, just before leaving America, I received word from a relative that the online liquor store business I had built was in trouble. Mismanagement had led to delayed shipments, incorrect orders, and a flood of customer complaints. Negative word of mouth spread quickly, tarnishing the store's reputation and impacting sales. Concurrently, my father's daily drinking habits became a local talking point, casting a shadow over the store's image and reducing customer traffic. Sales plummeted, and the store, which had been on the path to financial stability, was forced to shut down. The 4 individuals, now lacking credibility, struggled to find employment locally. Unable to repay their debts, they lost the store and the house they had used as collateral, leaving them without means of income or a place to stay. After losing their home, the family of 4 desperately tried to reach out to me. Fortunately, my extended family, who had become my allies, protected my whereabouts, allowing me to avoid contact with them. Despite Noah's wife being pregnant and nearing her due date, all 4 adults remained unemployed. Their daily quarrels, discussions on survival strategies, and reluctance to seek employment eventually devolved into petty arguments and blame games. Meanwhile, I married Jason, my coworker who had stood by me during my hospitalization. Our bond grew stronger through that experience. Around the same time, we were both offered positions at our company's overseas branch. These circumstances led to our relationship and our decision to marry. After dedicating so much time to rebuilding my parents' business, I now cherish the moments with my husband and strive to balance our work and home life together. For years, my family took my sacrifices for granted. They neglected to put in any effort, relying on others for everything, with only their own benefit in mind. It was predictable what would happen to people who never bothered to try. I am grateful to those who rescued me. Using my family as a negative example, I strive to live a fulfilling life, considering not only my own interests but also those of others.
Growing up, our house was like a military camp. My father, a college teacher, ran a tight ship. My older sister Sarah was the perfect child, obedient, studious, and always eager to please. Me? I was the wild card, the one who always pushed the boundaries. Carol, sit up straight, my father would bark during dinner. A lady doesn't slouch. I'd roll my eyes and straighten my spine, only to slump down again the moment he looked away. It was a constant battle of wills. My mother, though less vocal, was equally strict. She'd purse her lips disapprovingly at my choice of clothes or friends. "What will the neighbors think?" was her constant refrain. Despite the suffocating atmosphere at home, I managed to carve out a bit of freedom for myself. I started dating Jake when I was 16. He was 19, in college, and everything my parents would disapprove of. We kept it secret, stealing moments together whenever we could. Life seemed to be looking up. I had plans to go to college, to finally escape the suffocating grip of my parents' expectations. But fate, it seems, had other plans. It was a few months after my 18th birthday when I started feeling sick in the mornings. At first, I brushed it off as stress from my upcoming exams. But as the days went by, a nagging suspicion began to grow. I still remember standing in the tiny bathroom of a gas station, staring at the little plastic stick in my trembling hands. 2 pink lines. Positive. I was pregnant. I spent the next few days and a days trying to figure out what to do. I knew I had to tell Jake, but every time I picked up the phone, my courage failed me. Finally, I couldn't put it off any longer. We met at our usual spot, a small park hidden away from prying eyes. Jake was all smiles when he saw me, but his face fell as soon as he noticed my expression. "Carol, what's wrong?" he asked, reaching for my hand. I pulled away, wrapping my arms around myself. "I'm pregnant," I blurted out. The silence that followed was deafening. Jake's face went through a range of emotions: shock, disbelief, and then fear. "Are you sure?" he finally managed to say. I nodded, tears welling up in my eyes. I took 3 tests. They were all positive. Jake ran his hands through his hair, his eyes cold. "You need to get rid of it. An abortion, Carol. It's the only way. We're too young for this. It would ruin both our lives." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This was Jake, the boy I thought I loved, telling me to abort our child like it was nothing more than an inconvenience. "Get out of my sight," I hissed, turning away from him. He left without another word, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the weight of the decision I now had to make. Telling my parents was even worse. I waited until after dinner, when my father was in his usual spot in the living room, reading the newspaper. My mother was knitting, and Sarah was there too, hovering in the background. "I have something to tell you," I said, my voice shaking. My father lowered his newspaper, eyeing me suspiciously. "What is it, Carol?" I took a deep breath. "I'm pregnant." The explosion that followed was worse than I could have imagined. My father's face turned an alarming shade of red as he yelled about shame and disappointment. My mother burst into tears, wailing about what the neighbors would think. Sarah just stood there, her face a mask of shock and disgust. "You will get an abortion," my father declared once he'd calmed down enough to speak coherently. "We'll find a discreet clinic. No one needs to know about this mistake." Despite my initial reluctance, the constant pressure from my family wore me down. A few days later, I found myself sitting in a sterile doctor's office, my mother and Sarah flanking me like prison guards. The doctor, a kind-faced woman in her 50s, reviewed my charts with a frown. She looked up at me, her eyes full of concern. "Carol, I need to inform you of something important," she said gently. "Given your medical history and certain risk factors, if you proceed with an abortion, there's a high likelihood that you may never be able to have children again." The words hit me like a ton of bricks. Never have children again? The choice suddenly became crystal clear. "No," I said, my voice stronger than I expected. "I'm not doing it. I'm keeping this baby." My mother gasped. Sarah rolled her eyes. But I stood firm. The drive home was tense and silent. As soon as we walked through the door, my father was there, expectant. "Well?" he demanded. "She wouldn't do it," my mother spat. "After everything we've done for her." My father's face contorted with rage. "You ungrateful little—" He cut himself off, taking a deep breath. When he spoke again, his voice was cold and final. "Get out," he said. "Pack your things and get out of this house. You're no daughter of mine. I won't have you embarrassing this family with your condition." My mother nodded in agreement, her eyes hard. "You heard your father. Go." Sarah just stood there, silent and judgmental. Tears streaming down my face, I ran to my room and threw some clothes into a bag. As I headed for the door, my father's voice stopped me one last time. "And don't think about coming back. As far as we're concerned, you're dead to us." The door slammed behind me, the sound final and devastating. I was alone, pregnant, and homeless. In desperation, I called the only person I thought might help, my Aunt Linda. She and Uncle Bob had always been the black sheep of the family, living in another state and rarely speaking to my parents. "Carol? What's wrong, sweetie?" Aunt Linda's voice was warm and concerned. Through tears, I explained everything. There was a long pause after I finished. "Where are you now?" she finally asked. "Outside our house. They kicked me out." Another pause. "Stay right there. We're coming to get you." The drive to Aunt Linda and Uncle Bob's house was long, but it gave me time to process everything that had happened. Their house was modest but welcoming. As soon as we arrived, Aunt Linda went into full mother hen mode, fussing over me and insisting I eat something. Uncle Bob carried my bag to the spare room, which would now be my room. "It's not much," he said, setting the bag down, "but it's yours for as long as you need it." I looked around the small, cozy room and felt a lump in my throat. "It's perfect," I whispered. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of doctor's appointments, discussions about my future, and adjusting to my new life. "We've been thinking," Aunt Linda said one evening over dinner. "We want to help you continue your education." I looked up from my plate, surprised. "What do you mean?" Uncle Bob leaned forward. "We've set aside some money over the years. We never had kids of our own, so we thought we'd use it to help you go to college." I was speechless. After everything that had happened, the idea of still being able to pursue my dreams seemed impossible. I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Aunt Linda smiled. "We believe in you, Carol. This baby doesn't have to mean the end of your dreams." And so, with their support, I enrolled in a local community college, majoring in business management. It wasn't easy, balancing classes with doctor's appointments and the increasing discomfort of pregnancy, but I was determined to make it work. I also found a job as a waitress at a local restaurant. The owner, a kind woman named Maria, was understanding about my situation and flexible with my hours. It wasn't much, but it allowed me to start saving for the baby and contribute a little to Aunt Linda and Uncle Bob's household. The day my son was born was the most terrifying and beautiful day of my life. After hours of labor, I held him in my arms, marveling at his tiny fingers and toes. Aunt Linda and Uncle Bob were there, beaming with pride like grandparents. "What are you going to name him?" Aunt Linda asked softly. I looked down at my son's face, so peaceful in sleep. "Daniel," I said. "It means God is my judge. Because no matter what anyone else thinks, I know I made the right choice." As I settled into motherhood, juggling a newborn with college classes and work, I often thought about my parents and Sarah. Had they heard about Daniel? Did they ever regret their decision? But I pushed those thoughts aside. I had a new family now, one that accepted me and loved me unconditionally. One day, as I was scrolling through social media during a rare moment of downtime, a post caught my eye. It was from Sarah. My heart skipped a beat as I read it. "Excited to announce that Jake and I are engaged. Can't wait to start our life together." The photo showed Sarah, beaming, her arm around Jake, the same Jake who had abandoned me and our child. They looked happy, carefree. Like nothing had ever happened. I felt a surge of emotions, anger, hurt, betrayal. But as I looked over at Daniel, peacefully playing in his crib, I realized something. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their love. I had everything I needed right here. The years flew by in a blur of diapers, textbooks, and late-night study sessions. My last semester was particularly challenging. I was taking extra classes to graduate on time, still working at the restaurant, and chasing after an energetic 3-year-old. Graduation day was a whirlwind of emotions. As I stood in line, waiting to receive my diploma, I scanned the crowd. Aunt Linda and Uncle Bob were there, of course, beaming with pride. Daniel sat on Uncle Bob's shoulders, waving excitedly every time he caught my eye. The real surprise came at the graduation party Aunt Linda and Uncle Bob threw for me. As we were celebrating, Maria, my boss from the restaurant, pulled me aside. "Carol, I have a proposition for you," she said, her eyes twinkling. "I'm looking for a new restaurant manager, and I think you'd be perfect for the job." I was stunned. "Me? But I've only ever been a waitress." Maria waved her hand dismissively. "You've been much more than that. I've seen how you handle difficult customers, how you organize the staff, how you balanced work and school and motherhood. That's the kind of dedication and skill I need in a manager." It was a dream come true. A stable job with better pay and regular hours, exactly what I needed for Daniel and me to start our new life. The next few years were a whirlwind of positive changes. I threw myself into my new role at the restaurant, learning everything I could about management and business operations. Daniel started school, growing into a bright, curious boy who loved to read and play baseball. It was at one of Daniel's Little League games that I met Tom. He was there with his son, Michael, who was on the opposing team. We struck up a conversation, and I was immediately drawn to his kind eyes and easy laugh. "Single dad?" I asked, noticing he was alone. He nodded, a sad smile crossing his face. "Widower, actually. Michael's mom passed away when he was a baby." My heart went out to him. "I'm so sorry. It must be tough." "It is," he admitted. "But we manage. How about you? Single mom?" I laughed. "Is it that obvious?" Our relationship developed slowly. We were both cautious, having been hurt before and with our children to consider. But as the months passed, I found myself falling for Tom. He was kind, patient, and Daniel adored him. A year after we met, Tom proposed. It wasn't a grand, theatrical gesture, just a quiet moment in his backyard, with our boys playing nearby. Our wedding was small and intimate, just close friends and family. As I walked down the aisle, Daniel proudly by my side as the ring bearer, I caught Aunt Linda's eye. She was crying, but her smile was radiant. Life with Tom, Daniel, and Michael settled into a comfortable rhythm. And a couple of years after our wedding, we were blessed with another addition to our family. Our daughter, Emily, was born on a warm spring morning. As I held her in my arms, with Tom, Daniel, and Michael gathered around the hospital bed, I felt a sense of completeness I'd never experienced before. I loved all three of my children equally, Daniel and Emily, my biological children, and Michael, my stepson. They were all my kids, regardless of blood ties. One evening, as Aunt Linda was over helping with the kids, we were startled by a familiar voice coming from the TV. There, larger than life, were my parents. My father was standing at a podium, waving to a cheering crowd. The ticker at the bottom of the screen read, "John Williams announces candidacy for mayor." I felt my heart stop. It had been years since I'd seen my parents, even if only on a screen. My father looked older, his hair grayer, but his eyes still held that stern, determined look I remembered so well. As we watched him speak about family values and moral integrity, Aunt Linda's face contorted with anger. "Hypocrites," she spat, her voice trembling with rage. I turned to her, shocked by her outburst. "Aunt Linda?" She took a deep breath, her eyes never leaving the screen. "There's something you need to know, Carol. Something they've hidden for years." What she told me next shook me to my core. Many years ago, before Sarah and I were born, my parents had their first child, a boy. But he was born with severe physical defects, without legs. Instead of embracing their child, they left him at the hospital, afraid he would embarrass them. I felt a whirlwind of emotions, shock, anger, disbelief, and a profound sadness for the brother I never knew. "Why didn't you tell me before?" I asked. Aunt Linda's eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry, Carol. I should have. But after what they did to you, I didn't want to add to your pain." That night, after the kids were in bed, I made a decision. I needed to find my brother. With Tom's support, I hired a private investigator. Weeks passed, and finally, we got a lead. My brother was alive, and against all odds, he had thrived. He was a successful writer, married with children of his own. He had been adopted by a wealthy family who had given him every opportunity to succeed in life. Meeting him for the first time was surreal. Despite his physical differences, I could see echoes of my own features in his face. His name was James, and he greeted me with a warm smile and open arms. "I always knew I had a biological family out there somewhere," he said, his voice gentle. "I just never expected to find a sister." Over the next few months, James and I grew close. I introduced him to my family, and he welcomed us into his. His wife, Sarah, a coincidence that made me laugh, and their 2 children became a part of our extended family. 20 years had passed since that fateful day when my parents kicked me out of their house. Life had moved on, bringing its share of joys and sorrows. My eldest, Daniel, was now 19 and had just started college on a baseball scholarship. I couldn't have been prouder of the young man he'd become. One lazy Sunday afternoon, as I was scrolling through news articles on my tablet, a familiar face caught my eye. It was my father, looking older but still carrying that air of self-importance I remembered so well. The headline read, "Mayor John Williams discusses family values in exclusive interview." Curiosity got the better of me, and I clicked on the video. For a few minutes, I listened to my father espouse the importance of family, integrity, and moral values. And then, the interviewer asked about his children. My father's face softened into what I recognized as his public sympathy look. "I have one daughter, Sarah. She's the light of our lives. Tragically, we lost 2 of our children. The pain never really goes away, but it's made our family stronger." For days, I seethed with a quiet rage. How dare they? How dare they erase me, erase James, and paint themselves as tragic, sympathetic figures? Then, almost as if fate was intervening, James called. "Carol, guess what? I'm doing a book signing in our hometown next week. It would mean the world to me if you could come." "I wouldn't miss it for the world," I told James, a plan already forming in my mind. The following week, I found myself back in the city of my childhood. As I walked the familiar streets, memories flooded back, some good, many painful. I pushed them aside, focusing on what I needed to do. The book signing was being held in the grand ballroom of the city's most prestigious hotel. As I entered, I saw that James hadn't exaggerated, it seemed like half the town was there. Local celebrities, business leaders, and politicians all mingled, waiting for the event to begin. And there, in the front row, sat my parents and Sarah. My father, now the mayor, looked every inch the distinguished politician. My mother, elegantly dressed, smiled and nodded at acquaintances. Sarah was sitting next to them. They hadn't seen me yet. I took a seat near the back, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure everyone could hear it. James rolled onto the stage in a wheelchair, to enthusiastic applause. He looked confident, at ease in the spotlight. As he began to speak about his book and his life, I saw my parents nodding sympathetically. "I was born with a severe physical disability," James was saying. "No legs, and other health issues. My biological parents abandoned me at the hospital, unable or unwilling to care for a child with my needs." I watched my father's face carefully. He showed no sign of recognition, no hint of shame. Just the carefully crafted mask of a politician expressing appropriate concern for a constituent's sad story. James continued, "I was fortunate. I was adopted by a wonderful family who gave me every opportunity to succeed. But I always wondered about my birth family. Who were they? Why did they give me up?" The room was silent, all eyes fixed on James as he continued his story. I stood to the side, my heart racing, waiting for the moment that would change everything. Then, James smiled, his eyes twinkling with a mix of mischief and determination. "But that's not the end of our story," he said. "You see, I found my family. My sister, Carol, is here with us today." He turned towards me, extending his hand. "Carol, would you join me on stage?" A collective gasp rippled through the audience as I stepped into the spotlight. I saw recognition dawn on many faces. After all, I had grown up in this town. But the most striking reactions came from the front row. My parents' faces drained of color, their expressions a mixture of shock, fear, and dawning comprehension. Sarah, my sister, looked like she'd seen a ghost. They knew their carefully constructed facade was about to crumble. My parents stood abruptly, clearly intending to make a hasty exit. But I wasn't about to let them escape the truth again. "Mom, Dad, please stay," I called out, my voice echoing through the now silent room. "I think it's time we had an honest conversation, don't you?" They froze, trapped by the eyes of the entire audience. Slowly, reluctantly, they sank back into their seats. I took a deep breath. Many of you knew me growing up. You knew my family. But there's a lot you didn't know. A lot that's been hidden for far too long. And then, I told them everything. How my parents had abandoned James at the hospital, ashamed of his physical differences. How they'd hidden his existence, building their reputation on a foundation of lies. And then, history repeated itself, I continued, my voice growing stronger. When I got pregnant at 18, they didn't offer support or understanding. They demanded I have an abortion, ignoring the doctors who said it could leave me infertile. And when I refused, they kicked me out. Their own daughter, pregnant and alone, thrown away to protect their precious reputation. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. I saw looks of disgust directed at my parents, who seemed to shrink in their seats. "For years, I've heard them talk about family values and morality," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "But their actions tell a different story. They abandoned 2 of their children when we needed them most. They erased us from their lives to maintain their perfect image." The room erupted into chaos. People were shouting, some at my parents, others at each other. Journalists who had come to cover a simple book signing were now frantically taking notes or speaking rapidly into their phones. In the midst of the uproar, I locked eyes with my father. The man who had loomed so large in my childhood now looked small, defeated. My mother was openly weeping, while Sarah sat frozen, her face a mask of shock and confusion. In the days that followed, the story exploded. It was all over the local news, then national. My father's political career evaporated overnight. The man who had preached about integrity and family values was exposed as a hypocrite of the highest order. His position as mayor became untenable. He resigned within a week, citing personal reasons. But everyone knew the truth. The college where he had taught quickly distanced themselves, terminating his position. Amidst all the chaos, one thing became clear: my sister Sarah had made her choice. She stood firmly by our parents, refusing to acknowledge the truth of what they had done. "You've ruined everything," she hissed during a brief phone call. "Don't contact me again. You're dead to me, just like you're dead to Mom and Dad." But life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. A few days later, I received a call from a number I hadn't seen in over 20 years. It was Jake, Sarah's husband, and the father of my eldest son. "Carol?" His voice was hesitant, almost sheepish. "I've been thinking about us. About what happened. Sarah and we can't have children. And I thought, maybe we have a son together. We could be a family." I couldn't help but laugh. "Jake, you made your choice 20 years ago. You abandoned me when I was pregnant with your child. You married my sister. And now, just because you can't have children with her, you think you can come back to me? No, that's not how this works." "But Carol." "No, Jake. I have a wonderful husband and a beautiful family. I don't need you, and I certainly don't want you. Goodbye." I hung up, feeling a sense of closure I hadn't realized I needed. However, the surprises weren't over. The next day, I received another unexpected call. This time, it was from Jake's parents. "Carol?" a tentative voice asked. "This is Martha, Jake's mother. We just found out about Daniel. Is it true? Do we have a grandson?" The conversation that followed was emotional and eye-opening. It turned out that Jake and my parents had told them I'd had an abortion and run away from home. They'd spent years believing their grandchild never existed. "We'd like to meet him," Martha said, her voice trembling. "If that's okay with you, of course. We understand if you don't want us in your lives." I thought about it for a moment. These people weren't responsible for Jake's actions or my parents' lies. They were victims of the deception too. "Okay," I said finally. "I'll talk to Daniel and see if he's open to meeting you." The meeting between Daniel and his paternal grandparents went surprisingly well. There were tears, hugs, and a lot of catching up to do. Daniel, always compassionate, welcomed them with open arms. In the months that followed, life settled into a new normal. James and his family became regular fixtures in our lives, filling our home with laughter and love. Aunt Linda and Uncle Bob doted on all the grandchildren, biological or not. As for my parents and Sarah, I heard snippets of news now and then. They'd moved away, trying to escape the scandal. Part of me felt sorry for them, but I knew I'd done the right thing in telling the truth. My name's Lana, just a regular girl who ended up pouring drinks at Joe's bar downtown after high school. It wasn't anything fancy, but it paid the bills and kept me busy. That's where I first laid eyes on Daniel. It was a Thursday night, the kind where the bar was buzzing but not too packed, just how I like it. In walked this guy, Daniel, with a few of his buddies. Right off, he stuck out. Not because he was loud or anything, he was the calm kind, the kind that had an easy smile and a look in his eyes that said he knew something you didn't. He sauntered over to the bar and took a seat right in front of where I was working. "Hey," he said, flashing that grin. "What's good here, besides the view?" I shot him a look. "Beer's cold, if that's what you mean," I replied, not letting on that I caught his cheeky compliment. His laugh was genuine, and it made me smile despite myself. "I'll take one then, and whatever you recommend for yourself. Let's make it two," he added. Pouring the drinks, I couldn't help but notice the way he watched me, not in a creepy way, but like he was actually interested in what I was doing. "So, you come here often?" I joked as I handed him the beers. "First time, actually. My friend said this place has the best service in town." "Guess they were right," Daniel said, his eyes not leaving mine. We chatted more than I usually did with customers. He told me about his college days, all fancy and full of big words I didn't bother to remember. And I told him about growing up here in town, how I always thought I'd do something more but never figured out what that more was. "You're interesting, Lana," he said out of the blue. "Not like the usual crowd in here." I raised an eyebrow. "Thanks, I guess. You're not too bad yourself, for a rich boy." He laughed again, that sound that filled up the space around us. "Rich boy, huh? Trust me, having money's not all it's cracked up to be." We got interrupted then by his friends, who were ready to move on to some club or another. He stood up, tossed a 50 on the bar, way too much for 2 beers, and winked. "Maybe I'll find that right company if I come back here." And just like that, he was gone, melting into the crowd with his friends. But something about him lingered, like the echo of his laugh in my ears, making me wonder if I'd see him again. Daniel started showing up at the bar every single night after that first encounter. At first, I figured he was just like any other guy, killing time with a beer and small talk. But then, the talks got longer and a whole lot more personal. He'd settle into his usual spot, and as I wiped down the counter or restocked the shelves, he'd tell me bits and pieces about his life, his family. "My dad's pretty big into politics," he'd say with a casual shrug, like he was talking about the weather, not dropping that his father was one of the state's top politicians. "And Mom, well, she's a housewife, keeps everything running smooth at home." The more we talked, the more I saw past the polished surface. Sure, he had money and a name that opened doors, but there was something else, something real that I couldn't quite put my finger on. And despite my better judgment, I found myself looking forward to those evenings when he'd show up. One night, it all changed. He came in looking serious, his usual smile nowhere in sight. "Lana, "I've been thinking," he started, hesitating a bit. "How about we go out tomorrow? Somewhere nice, not just here." It was sudden, but not unwelcome. "Like a date?" I asked, trying to sound cool but feeling my heart thump a little harder. "Yeah, a date," he confirmed, his smile back as if he'd won some sort of victory seeing my reaction. That date led to another and another. Before I knew it, we were seeing each other every day. Daniel talked about his life, and I shared mine. He'd laugh off the differences, saying, "Wealth's my only drawback, you know." But it wasn't just his wealth. Daniel loved the high life, parties, late nights, the kind of leisure I could hardly imagine. He brushed off my concerns with a wave. "Things will change, Lana. You'll see." Then came the night he wanted me to meet his parents. I was a bundle of nerves. We drove up to their mansion, the kind of place you see in movies, with sprawling gardens and more rooms than you'd know what to do with. His mother, Mrs. Patricia Gilmore, was as chilly as the marble floors, sizing me up like I was something she found stuck to her shoe. "A waitress," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "Really, Daniel, you expect her to fit into our world?" His father, Gerald Gilmore, however, beamed at me as if I was the first honest thing he'd seen in years. "Lana, dear, it's refreshing to see someone from real life. You're just what we need. A bridge to the common man, right before the elections." I didn't know whether to be flattered or offended. The dinner was tense, Mrs. Gilmore sniping comments under her breath, Mr. Gilmore countering with grand declarations about my refreshing simplicity. At one point, Mrs. Gilmore had enough, standing up so fast her chair almost toppled over. "I will not stand for this," she hissed, storming out of the room. Mr. Gilmore just winked at me across the table. "Don't you worry, Lana. Everything will be just fine." That wink was supposed to reassure me, but it felt like I was being swept into a game I didn't know how to play. Weeks later, Daniel got down on one knee, right there in the bar where we first met, with the same cheeky grin he had that first night. "Marry me, Lana, and let's show them all how it's done," he said. And I, lost in the moment and in him, said yes. The wedding was anything but the quiet affair I'd hoped for. From the moment Daniel popped the question, his father took over the whole show. He insisted on a grand ceremony, one that would be talked about far and wide. "It'll be perfect for the campaign," he'd say with a sly grin, every time I brought up keeping things small. So, there I was, standing in a dress fancier than anything I'd ever owned, with cameras flashing in my face as I tried to keep my smile from faltering. The reporters swarmed around us, and Mr. Gilmore relished every moment, playing the gracious father-in-law to perfection. "See, folks, this is what real love looks like. Unity across different worlds," he announced to the cameras, slinging his arm around me a little too tightly. I glanced over at my parents, sitting off to the side, their expressions a mix of awe and discomfort. They weren't used to this kind of spectacle, and frankly, neither was I. Mrs. Gilmore, decked out in a dress that probably cost more than my dad's car, pasted on a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She leaned in during the photo op, whispering through clenched teeth, "Smile, Lana. Today, we're all family." After the spectacle, Daniel and I moved into a luxury apartment, a stark contrast to my modest childhood home. It was a wedding gift from his parents, lavish and sprawling, located in one of the city's most exclusive buildings. Daniel's nights out with his friends became more frequent, and I found myself alone in our expansive living space more often than not. His mother, Mrs. Gilmore, took it upon herself to drop by unannounced, always with a critique ready at her lips. One such afternoon, she found me trying to straighten up the mess from one of Daniel's late-night gatherings. She surveyed the room with a disdainful eye before fixing her gaze on me. "Lana, this isn't some roadside diner. You need to keep a better eye on Daniel. Look at him, he's out all the time, drinking, and it's your job to rein him in." I bristled at her words, my hands clenching the dishcloth tighter. "And what exactly do you suggest I do, Mrs. Gilmore? Chain him to a chair?" Her lips thinned into a line. "Don't be smart, Lana. You need to take control. Otherwise, you're just as much to blame." The air was tense between us, the only sounds the soft tick of the expensive clock on the wall and the distant hum of city life outside the windows. That night, when Daniel came home, I tried to talk to him about it. "Your mom thinks I'm not doing enough to keep you in line," I said, trying to keep my voice even. Daniel's reaction was immediate and heated. "You gonna listen to her? Let's not let her get between us, okay? I love you, Lana. We'll figure this out together." But as the weeks rolled on, nothing changed. Daniel's assurances felt more and more hollow, and I found myself questioning whether love was enough to bridge the chasm that seemed to be widening between us. Living the high life wasn't all it was cracked up to be, not by a long shot. I found myself constantly tidying our massive apartment, cooking meals that often went cold before Daniel got home, and hustling laundry to and from the cleaners, all while holding down my shifts at Joe's bar. Meanwhile, Daniel, with no job on his horizon, seemed content to blow through his hefty allowance on nights out with his friends. Daniel's mother, the queen of high society gossip, made sure everyone knew her twisted version of our life. According to her, I was the villain, a dumb, greedy woman who led her poor son astray with my low-class ways. It was a normal day at the bar when she decided to bring her highfalutin friends for a casual lunch. The moment they strutted in, I knew I was in for it. They perched at the bar, their noses turned up like they smelled something foul. Mrs. Gilmore waved me over with a flick of her wrist, her voice loud enough to turn a few heads. "Lana, darling, could you hurry up? We don't have all day, and we expect proper service even in this establishment." Her friends snickered, their eyes scanning the bar with barely disguised contempt. I forced a smile, taking their orders while my hands itched to dump a tray of drinks right into their laps. "Make sure the glasses are clean, dear. We wouldn't want to catch anything," one of her cronies quipped, her laughter sharp as shattered glass. "Yes, ma'am," I replied, my tone syrupy sweet. I delivered their drinks and food with a smile plastered on, though inside I felt anything but cheerful. As I passed by with another order, Mrs. Gilmore grabbed my arm, her grip tight. "You know, Lana, it's a shame you don't use your husband's money to better yourself. Maybe some classes in etiquette? Or a seminar on how to be a supportive wife?" I pulled away gently, keeping my voice steady. "I appreciate the advice, Mrs. Gilmore. I'll give it all the consideration it deserves." The bar couldn't close fast enough that day. Each comment, each condescending look from that table, added weight to the growing dread that this was my life now, scrutinized and scorned, no matter how hard I tried. Back at our apartment, the silence was a stark contrast to the chaos at the bar. Daniel was out again, the note on the fridge a weak apology for missing dinner. I was left alone with my thoughts, which were as cluttered as the untouched plates on our dining table. Meanwhile, I started paying the bills from my own tips, because Daniel's idea of budgeting was seeing how quickly he could spend his money each month. Groceries, utilities, even the damn cable bill, I covered them all. His promises to get his act together and find a job were as empty as our conversations. The election season was in full swing, and Mr. Gilmore was more eager than ever to parade me around at every possible public event. He'd introduce me with great fanfare, always emphasizing how his son had married a simple girl from the people. At rallies, dinners, and interviews, I wore my smile like a mask, nodding and playing the part of the approachable daughter-in-law. But behind the smiles and the polite applause, I was weary. The constant scrutiny, the endless small talk with people who cared more about my story as a campaign tool than as a person, it was exhausting. More than once, I found myself eyeing the exits at these events, longing for nothing more than to run out and never look back. One evening, after yet another fundraiser that had stretched on for hours, Mr. Gilmore pulled me aside, his hand gripping my shoulder a little too firmly. "Lana, I need you to keep this up. You know, your cooperation is crucial. Remember, your lifestyle, this apartment, it's all thanks to our support." I nodded, the thread in his tone clear as glass. "Of course, Mr. Gilmore. I understand." It wasn't just the campaign that was putting pressure on me. Things at home were no better. Daniel's behavior had escalated from neglect to outright destructiveness. He'd come home late, if he came home at all, often drunk and sometimes barely able to stand. Then came the night that changed everything. Daniel stumbled through the door well past midnight, his face ashen, eyes wild with panic. He collapsed onto the sofa, his hands shaking. "Lana, I've screwed up," he blurted out, his voice a hoarse whisper. "I owe money, a lot of money. To some really bad people. I lost it at the casino, and they're not the type to wait for their cash." My stomach twisted at his words. "How much?" "70,000, he murmured, looking away. I felt cold all over. $70,000? He nodded, miserable. "I need your help, Lana. Please, I can't ask my parents. They'd disown me." The desperation in his eyes was something I couldn't ignore. He grabbed my hands, his grip tight. "I swear, Lana, if you help me with this, I'll change. I know I've been a terrible husband, but I'll do anything to make this right. Please." Something in me broke then. Despite the anger and the disappointment, I couldn't let him face this alone. "Okay, Daniel. I'll help you. But this is it. You have to turn things around." I took out a loan the next day, $70,000 that felt like a noose around my neck. But as I handed the money over, Daniel was like a man reborn. He helped around the house, cut back on the drinking, and for a brief, fleeting moment, I let myself believe that we could actually make this work. We spent evenings together, talking about plans for the future, even daring to dream about starting a family. Daniel was attentive, helping with chores, sharing meals at the same table, things we hadn't done in years. "Maybe we should think about having a kid," he suggested one night as we cleaned up after dinner. I looked at him, surprised but not unhappy at the thought. "Really? You think we're ready?" He smiled, pulling me close. "Yeah, I do. I mean, we're getting back on track, right? A fresh start." I wanted to believe him, to believe in us. And in those moments, it was easy to imagine that everything could actually be okay, that the debts and lies were behind us. But that illusion shattered the night I came home from a double shift at the bar. Tossing my keys on the counter, I headed for the bedroom, my body aching for just a few hours of sleep before doing it all over again. But the scene I walked into snapped me wide awake. Daniel was passed out on our bed, snoring loudly, with two girls I'd never seen before curled up beside him, both just as unconscious. Bottles and glasses littered the nightstand, the stench of alcohol heavy in the air. My heart hammered against my ribcage as a cold rage settled in my gut. Without thinking, I pulled out my phone and started recording. The camera's light cut through the darkness, capturing the damning scene. I nudged Daniel awake, my voice sharp. "Daniel, who are these girls?" He blinked up at me, confused and still drunk, then waved a dismissive hand as if brushing away the question. "They're just my girlfriends, you know? It's not a big deal. We do this sometimes when you're at work." That was it. The final betrayal. I stopped the recording, my hands trembling with a cocktail of emotions, rage, sorrow, disbelief. I stepped out of the room, dialed Mr. Gilmore, and waited for him to pick up. "Lana? What's wrong?" His voice was cautious, alert. "Mr. Gilmore, I'm done. I just caught Daniel in our bed with two other women. I've recorded everything, and I want a divorce," I said, each word measured, heavy with finality. He was at the apartment within the hour, his face a mask of controlled fury as he glanced at the still unconscious figures in my bed. Daniel had woken up by then, looking sheepish and scared as his father berated him in hushed, vicious tones. "You idiot! Look what you've done!" Turning to me, Mr. Gilmore's tone softened. "Lana, I'll handle this. Let's keep it quiet, for everyone's sake. What do you need?" $500,000, the apartment sold and the money transferred to me, and the loan I took out for him cleared, I stated, each demand non-negotiable. Mr. Gilmore nodded slowly, calculating. "Done. But you must agree to keep this quiet. Move away, start fresh somewhere else. Can you do that?" "Yes," I said simply. There was nothing left for me here, no reason to stay. And Lana, don't tell his mother. She'd make a scene, and we can't afford that now, not with the elections. The divorce papers came through quietly. I signed them in the dim light of dawn, alone. Mr. Gilmore kept his word. The money was in my account within days, the loan was paid off, and I was free from Daniel and his destructive whims. Settling into my new life in another city felt like breathing fresh air after being submerged underwater for too long. The day I moved into my new apartment in a peaceful neighborhood, I knew I had made the right decision. It was smaller than the luxurious prison I'd left behind, but it was all mine. The first thing I did after unpacking was block every number associated with my old life. Every ring was a potential drag back into that mess, and I wasn't about to let that happen. Then, I went out and bought myself a car. Nothing too fancy, but sleek and new, something just for me. A few days later, I landed a job as an administrator at a local restaurant. It was a step up from waitressing, with regular hours and no late nights. The owner, a wiry woman named Carla, with a sharp tongue and a no-nonsense attitude, took me under her wing. "You new to town?" Carla asked on my first day, eyeing me with a mixture of curiosity and caution. "Yeah, just moved in," I replied, keeping my past tucked away like the folded boxes in my closet. Carla nodded, as if approving my concise answer. "Well, here's your desk, and here are your responsibilities. You keep things running smooth, and we'll get along just fine." "I appreciate it, Carla. I won't let you down," I promised, eager to prove my worth in this new role. The job was busy, filled with the usual chaos of restaurant life, but I thrived on the structure it brought to my days. I was making my own money, controlling my own fate. It felt good, honest and real. Encouraged by Carla's blunt but fair management style, I decided to enroll in the local college. I wanted more than just to escape my past, I wanted to build something lasting. Night classes in business management seemed like the right path, and stepping into the classroom, I felt a surge of pride. I was doing this for me, no one else. One evening, as I was locking up the restaurant, Carla stopped by my desk. "Heard you're hitting the books at night. That's good. Keep that brain working." I smiled, grateful for her recognition. "Trying to. Figured it's never too late to start fresh, right?" "Damn right," Carla said with a nod. "You ever need help, you let me know. I know a thing or two about keeping a business above water." Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Work, study, and the quiet solitude of my apartment. I relished the normalcy, the mundane moments that I used to take for granted. It was during one of these quiet nights, sitting on my balcony with a cup of tea, that I realized just how much I had changed. The city lights sparkled in the distance, each one a reminder of where I'd been and where I was heading. 2 years had slipped by since I cut all ties with my old life and started anew. I was sitting in my living room, cozy and warm, a book forgotten on my lap, when my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, and hesitating for a split second, I answered. "Lana, this is Patricia Gilmore." The voice came through, high-pitched and frantic. "Daniel is in trouble because of your negligence." I was taken aback. "Mrs. Gilmore, slow down. What are you talking about? What trouble?" She was nearly breathless with agitation. "An unknown friend of Daniel called me. He said Daniel got into a fight with a policeman in a bar. I had to transfer money to keep him out of jail. I took it from our savings, and Gerald doesn't know yet." "Why weren't you there for him?" "Mrs. Gilmore, listen to me very carefully," I said, my voice calm and clear. "Daniel and I have been divorced for 2 years. I haven't seen or spoken to him since." There was a pause, and then, "Divorced? What are you talking about? Why didn't anyone tell me?" "You didn't know because it was meant to be kept quiet for the family's sake, for the election and all. I'm sorry you were left out, but I am no longer part of Daniel's life or your family." "And what happened to the policeman and Daniel?" Her voice cracked, and I could hear the confusion and fear seeping through. Laughing softly, I tried to find some humor in the absurdity of the situation. "Mrs. Gilmore, you've been scammed. There's no doubt about it. These scammers probably made up the whole story about the policeman just to trick you out of your money." There was a pause on the line as the realization sank in. Her voice quivered, fear replacing the anger from moments before. "Scammed? Oh no, what have I done?" Her tone was frantic, the weight of her mistake crashing down. "Can't you just lend me some money to put back before Gerald finds out?" "Please, Lana." "Mrs. Gilmore, I can't. It's not my place anymore. I've moved on. You need to handle this with your family," I replied, firm yet not unkind. Her crying intensified, then turned to anger. "You could help, but you choose not to. You're just as selfish as everyone said." I sighed, a deep, weary release. "I'm sorry you feel that way. I truly hope you sort this out, but I must go now." I hung up before she could reply, her sobs echoing in my ear even after the line went dead. Looking around my peaceful apartment, the stark contrast between my current life and the chaos of the past made me shudder. I picked up my phone again, this time navigating through the settings to block yet another number. As I set the phone down, a sense of finality washed over me. I was truly free now, no longer entangled in the web of deception and greed that had once defined my life. Hey there, I'm Ella. I'm a nurse, been one for a good few years now, working my shifts at the city clinic. Not the most glamorous gig, but it pays the bills, and I like helping folks. So, there I was, clipboard in hand, when this guy walks in. His name's Tom, and he's got his dad with him, an older gent who seemed a bit out of sorts. Tom looked all sorts of worried, his eyes scanning the busy waiting room like he was lost. Seeing him like that, I figured he needed a hand. "Hey, can I help you guys?" I called out as I approached them. Tom turned to me with a relieved look. "Oh, thank goodness. We're trying to find Dr. Lewis's office. Dad's got an appointment, and this place is a maze." I smiled, gesturing for them to follow. "You're not wrong there. Come on, I'll take you there." As we walked, his dad, who introduced himself as George, kept quiet, just shuffling along with us. Tom, on the other hand, chatted away. "Dad's been a bit under the weather, and we've been worried." "No worries, you've done the right thing bringing him in." "How long has he been feeling off?" I asked, trying to get a sense of how urgent the situation was. "A couple of weeks now. Just hasn't been himself, you know?" I nodded, understanding the anxiety that comes with seeing a parent unwell. "Yeah, I get that. It's tough. But you're doing a great job looking after him." Tom gave a half smile, clearly appreciating the support. "Thanks, Ella. I'm just trying to do my best." By then, we had reached the office, and I opened the door for them. "Here you go. Dr. Lewis will take good care of your dad." I waved goodbye and headed back to my station, feeling good about helping them out. Little did I know, that brief encounter would be just the beginning of something new for me. Tom's kind face and genuine concern for his dad stuck with me. It's not every day you meet someone who genuinely radiates kindness. Back at the nurse's station, my colleague Jess nudged me. "Looked like you just made a new friend." "Focus on your work, Jess," I teased, but I couldn't help the smile that lingered on my face as I thought about Tom's kind eyes and easy smile. It turned out, that wasn't the last I'd see of Tom. He'd pop in now and then, sometimes with his dad, sometimes with questions, or even just to say hi. Each visit, our chats got longer, laughter a bit louder, and I found myself looking forward to those unexpected moments. Months rolled by since that first help I gave Tom and his dad at the clinic. Who knew that a simple gesture would spark something that felt a bit like those cheesy romance tales? But here we were, Tom and I, finding excuses to meet up for coffee, turning those short visits into long evenings filled with chatter and laughter. One chilly evening, as we sat in our usual spot at the corner cafe, wrapped up in our warmest jackets, Tom's face got all serious, a look I wasn't used to. "Ella, there's something I've been wanting to ask you," he started, fiddling with his coffee cup. I raised an eyebrow, curious and a bit anxious. I was wondering, what do you think about us, making this official? Like, actually dating? I couldn't help but laugh, not at him, but at the sheer relief washing over me. Tom, I thought you'd never ask. I'd like that, a lot. Tom's folks owned a small laundry business, something they were mighty proud of. It was their life's work, right next to their home. One Sunday, Tom invited me over for dinner to meet his parents, Nancy and George. The nerves hit me like a truck. Meeting the parents was a big deal, especially when your boyfriend had described his mom as particular and his dad as old school. The house was cozy, filled with the warm, soapy scent of freshly laundered clothes. Nancy was in the kitchen, bustling around with pots and pans, while George sat in the living room, newspaper in hand. "Mom, this is Ella," Tom introduced me as we stepped into the kitchen. Nancy eyed me up and down, a hard-to-read expression on her face. "Nice to meet you, Ella. Tom tells us you're a nurse?" "That's right, Mrs. Johnson. At the city clinic," I replied, offering a smile, hoping to break through her stern exterior. A nurse, eh? Must be tough, what with all the hours. Ever think about a more stable job?" Her tone wasn't exactly welcoming, more like she was sizing me up for something. I felt a sting at her words, but kept my cool. "I love what I do, Mrs. Johnson. It's rewarding, and I manage the hours just fine." Dinner was a mix of awkward silences and tough questions from Nancy. George mostly stayed quiet, occasionally throwing in a word or two, mostly about the laundry business. It was clear they were proud of their work, and they hinted more than once how they hoped Tom would take over soon. "Ella, our laundry is a family business. Tom here has been a part of it since he was a boy. We'd love for him to run it full-time. Maybe you could join him, make it a real family affair," George said, passing the mashed potatoes. Tom quickly jumped in, seeing my discomfort. "Dad, Ella's got her career, and she's really good at it. We're just taking things as they come, right?" I nodded, grateful for his support, but the message was clear. They wanted their son tied to home, and maybe they expected the same from me. As we left that night, Tom apologized for his mom's hard edge. "She's protective, But she'll come around, I hope." I squeezed his hand, unsure of what the future held but certain about one thing: I wasn't ready to give up my scrubs for a laundry apron, not for anyone. We decided on a small wedding, nothing fancy, just close friends and family. One crisp Saturday morning, as we planned our modest reception, Tom's phone rang. He looked at it, frowned, and stepped out to take the call. When he came back, his face was ashen. "My dad, he's had a stroke. We need to go, now." The wedding plans got shoved to the back burner as we rushed to the hospital. The next few days were a blur of doctors, waiting rooms, and coffee that tasted like burnt tar. Tom was a wreck, and I did my best to support him, putting on a brave face while my heart ached for him. George didn't make it. The funeral was a week later, a somber affair with too many people saying how he was in a better place. I stood by Tom, holding his hand, feeling the weight of his grief. After the funeral, Nancy was a shadow of herself, quieter and more withdrawn. That's when Tom dropped the bombshell. "Ella, I need to be there for my mom. She shouldn't be alone right now. I was thinking, maybe we should move in with her, just for a while, until she gets back on her feet." The idea of living with Nancy, in that house that felt more like a business than a home, made my stomach turn. But I saw the desperation in Tom's eyes, and I loved him, so I agreed. And yet, first of all, we went to the mayor's office and legitimized our relationship, without a lavish ceremony and a white dress. Mr. and Mrs. Johnson. The move was hectic. Between packing up our stuff and trying to comfort a grieving mother-in-law, I barely had time to process my own feelings. Nancy wasn't exactly warm, it was her house, and she made sure we knew it. "Ella, make sure those boxes go in the storage room. We need to keep the hallway clear," she instructed the day we moved our last suitcase in. "Of course, Nancy. We'll handle it," I replied, trying to keep the peace. Life at Nancy's was tough. She had her ways of doing things and didn't appreciate deviation. I tried to help, to fit into this new, uncomfortable routine, but everything I did seemed to bother her. Tom was caught between us, trying to mediate but mostly just sinking deeper into his own sadness. He spent long hours at the laundry, avoiding the tension at home. I felt alone, surrounded by his family's memories and my growing resentment. "Ella, why are you still working at that clinic? You should focus on helping here, with the family business," Nancy said one night as we cleared the dinner table. "Nancy, I like my job. It's important to me," I responded, the fatigue and frustration making my voice sharper than I intended. She sighed, a long, drawn-out sound of disappointment. "I just don't see why you'd choose that over family." Lying in bed that night, listening to Tom's uneven breaths, I wondered how long we could keep this up. How long before the weight of his mother's expectations crushed the life we wanted to build together? My job at the clinic was on the other side of the city, which meant my days started in the dark and ended in it too. The commute was a beast, eating up hours I didn't have, and every trip felt longer than the last. Coming home was no relief. Nancy had a sharp eye for anything done less than perfect. I'd barely stepped through the door before the critique started. "Ella, you've left streaks on the window again. Do it over," she'd snap, barely looking up from her knitting. "And this soup is bland. Didn't I show you how to season it?" she'd add at dinner, making a face as if she'd tasted something sour. I tried, really tried, to brush it off and keep the peace, but it wore me down. Even Tom, my supposed partner in all this, started echoing his mom. "Ella, Mom's right. You could be a bit more careful with the cleaning and the cooking," he'd say, not meeting my eyes. It stung, hearing that from him, like I was failing some test I didn't sign up for. Our home felt less like ours, and more like I was an unwelcome guest who couldn't do anything right. One day, after a particularly rough shift at the clinic where I'd stayed late to cover for a coworker, earning me a small bonus, I came home with an idea. I was dead on my feet, but excited to share it with Tom. "Babe, I got a little bonus at work today. We've both been under so much stress. Why don't we take a short vacation? Just a few days. We deserve a break," I suggested, hoping for a moment of connection. Tom looked up from the bills he was sorting, his face unreadable. "That sounds great, babe, but I can't just leave the laundry. Mom can't handle it alone." "It's just a few days, Tom. She can manage, or we could call in some temporary help," I pushed back, needing something to feel normal again. Before Tom could reply, Nancy walked into the room, having caught the tail end of our conversation. Her face was set in a hard line. "A vacation? And leave me to deal with everything here? You think I'm just your backup plan, Ella? That's heartless, even cruel," Nancy snapped, her voice cold. "I'm not your servant, ready to pick up slack so you can frolic on the beach. I'm not made of steel." Tom's gaze followed her, and then he looked at me, his expression tight. "Mom's got a point, Ella. You can be a bit insensitive. Maybe now's not the time for a vacation." That hurt more than Nancy's words. My own husband, who should have had my back, sided with her over a simple, well-deserved break. I felt a mix of anger and sadness, a cocktail of emotions that left me more exhausted. So, my vacation days rolled around, and instead of lying on a beach somewhere, sipping something tropical, I was stuck at home. I spent those days mostly alone, with Tom at the laundry and Nancy giving me the cold shoulder. I'd escape to the city beach when I could, soaking up some sun and pretending things were different. Splitting my time between the clinic and the laundry wasn't my dream scenario, but after months of nonstop nagging from Nancy and Tom about not pitching in, I caved. "Fine, I'll help out at the laundry, but only part-time. I'm not giving up my job at the clinic," I told Tom, setting my terms. He seemed relieved, almost happy, but then he dropped another bomb. "That's great, babe, but I won't be able to pay you a salary. We'll just give you access to the family account, keep things simple and tax-free." I was too tired to argue. "Sure, whatever works," I muttered, not fully processing yet another sign that I was sinking deeper into their world, my own desires drifting away. the transition was rough. Mornings at the clinic were hectic, and afternoons at the laundry were a crash course in a business I had zero interest in. Still, I learned the ropes, got to know the regular customers, and even started seeing ways we could do things better. A few months in, I gathered enough courage to bring up my ideas at dinner. "Tom, Nancy, I've been thinking about how we could bring in more customers. Maybe we could offer loyalty discounts, or even host a weekly express service day?" Tom barely looked up from his plate. "Ella, I appreciate you trying to help, but I've been in this business since I was a kid. I know what works." I bit my lip, frustration bubbling. "It's just an idea. And there's also a room next door that just freed up. We could expand, offer more services." Nancy laughed, a harsh sound that made me flinch. "Trying to take over now? Think you can run things better than us?" "Don't make me laugh." I retreated, feeling smaller with each word. It was clear they didn't value my input, only my compliance. But I couldn't let it go. The laundry was struggling, and it pained me to watch something tied so closely to Tom fail because of stubbornness. One afternoon, as I folded clothes in the back, I overheard Tom arguing with a supplier on the phone. "No, I can't meet that order. We're not pulling enough profit this quarter," he said, frustration evident in his tone. I waited for him to hang up, then approached cautiously. "Tom, if we're struggling with profits, why not reconsider some of my suggestions? They could really help." He sighed, rubbing his forehead. "Ella, I said no. This is how we've always done it. It's not about new ideas, it's about tradition, about keeping things the way my dad ran them." I stepped back, realizing this battle was lost before it even began. Day by day, I watched the laundry's profits dip, our arguments become more frequent, and the distance between us grow. It was my birthday, a day I hoped would be a small bright spot in the dreary grind of the past months. I left a note for Tom on the kitchen table early in the morning, telling him I'd be out until noon. I wanted some time for myself, to just breathe and maybe feel a bit special. I spent the morning downtown, picking out a beautiful new dress and then treating myself to a full makeover at the beauty salon, hair, nails, the works. It felt indulgent, spending money and time on myself like that, but it was my day, and I was determined to enjoy it. However, the moment I stepped back into the house, bags in hand and feeling lighter than I had in weeks, the atmosphere shifted. I was met with a storm. "Where the hell have you been?" Tom barked the second I closed the door. Next to him, Nancy stood with her arms crossed, her expression thunderous. "I left a note," I stammered, confused by their anger. "I was out for my birthday, remember?" "Birthday?" Tom scoffed, and Nancy snorted. "A lot of good that does us. You left the laundry unattended, and there was no breakfast prepared. You think today's somehow different?" Nancy accused, stepping closer. Her voice was sharp, each word a knife. Stunned, I felt my heart sink. "But it's just one morning. One morning out of the entire year," I said, my voice barely a whisper now, hurt flashing through me. Nancy's lips curled in disdain. "I don't care about your birthday. You're just lazy and stupid, thinking only about yourself. You don't even do a good job as a housekeeper." I looked to Tom, searching his face for any sign of support, any hint of the man I'd married. "Tom, you don't believe that, do you? Tell me you don't agree with her." He met my gaze, his eyes cold and distant. "She's right, Ella. Maybe you don't fit in here after all. I don't need this chaos." That was it. The last straw. My whole body trembled with the force of my decision. "I want a divorce, Tom." Nancy clapped her hands, her voice rising in excitement. "Finally, we'll be rid of you, you stupid, arrogant freeloader. And you'll pay us back for letting you live here for 3 years. We've wasted enough on you." I laughed, a bitter sound that echoed in the tense air. "Oh, I'll pay you? Funny, I was thinking you owe me for all the unpaid labor. For every holiday, every sick day I never took. That's what you'll be paying me." Nancy's face fell, her mouth snapping shut. I didn't wait for another word. I marched upstairs, pulled out my suitcases, and started packing. Clothes, a few personal items, anything I could call mine. Within an hour, I was ready. Suitcase in hand, I walked out of that house. I didn't look back, not at the home I had tried to make mine, not at the life I thought I wanted. I moved into a small rented apartment, a place that was mine alone, no judgments, no snide remarks, just quiet and peace. For the first couple of days, I wallowed in my grief. But as I sat there in the silence of my new space, something shifted inside me. I was done crying. It was time to show them they were wrong, to prove that I could stand on my own. Fired up, I filed for divorce, laying out my case for the unpaid labor and the emotional turmoil they'd put me through. I also took a 3-month unpaid leave from the clinic. I needed this time, not just to heal but to set up my own venture, something that would hit Tom and Nancy where it hurt, their business. I remembered the vacant room next to their laundry, the same one I had suggested they expand into. It was a stroke of irony, or maybe fate, that it was still empty. With my savings, I signed the lease. The place was a mess, but I saw its potential. The renovations were tough, and every decision from paint colors to plumbing fixtures felt monumental. But I poured my heart into every detail. This has to be perfect, I told the contractor, pointing out exactly where I wanted the new washers and dryers. Top of the line, everything. Once the place was shaped up, I moved on to the supplies and equipment, choosing only the best. Safety and quality were my top priorities. I installed video surveillance and high security locks, ensuring that my customers would never have to worry about their belongings. With the logistics in place, I focused on the customer experience. I set up a small coffee machine offering free coffee, created a cozy corner for kids, and even installed a couple of slot machines to keep clients entertained while they waited. Every detail was designed to make my laundry not just a necessity, but a pleasant part of my customers' day. Opening day was a mix of nerves and excitement. People were curious, of course. Some came in just to see the new place, others out of loyalty to Tom and Nancy. But once they experienced the difference, word started to spread. I made it a point to meet every client, to ask about their day, to ensure they were satisfied with our service. "Thanks for choosing us," I'd say with a smile. "Let us know if there's anything else we can do for you." Slowly, word started spreading. Positive reviews popped up online, praising the clean facilities, friendly service, and innovative touches. More and more people began choosing my laundry over Tom's. One busy afternoon, as I refilled the coffee machine, a regular customer, Mrs. Henderson, approached me. "Ella, dear, I must say, your place is a breath of fresh air. I told all my friends about it." I smiled, handing her a cup. "Thank you, Mrs. Henderson. That means a lot to me. I'm glad you enjoy coming here." The popularity of my laundry grew, and with it, so did my confidence. I had created something out of nothing, turned pain into success. The satisfaction wasn't just in the profits or the praise, it was in proving that I could thrive, that I could make something better, all on my own. It was a busy Tuesday afternoon when they walked in, Nancy and Tom, looking like a storm brewing on the horizon. I was behind the counter, sorting through orders, but I straightened up the moment I saw them. My heart skipped, not out of fear, but readiness. I had prepared for this moment, although I hoped it would never come. Nancy wasted no time, her voice loud enough to turn heads. "You've ruined us, Ella. Stolen our customers with your underhanded tactics." Tom stood behind her, his expression hard to read. He looked tired, older than I remembered. "I haven't stolen anything. People choose where they want to go. I just provided a better option," I responded, my hand subtly pressing the button under the counter that alerted my security team. "This is all low, even for you." Nancy continued, her finger jabbing in the air towards me. "Making us bankrupt, you think you're clever?" I sighed, shaking my head. "I think I'm fair. I offered ideas, remember? You both pushed me out, laughed at my suggestions. I built this from scratch, honestly and with hard work." Tom finally spoke, his voice quiet. Ella, this isn't what we. Tom, look around you. I've made this place what it is, because I listened, I adapted, and I cared. Not only about profits, but about people. Nancy's face was red, her anger palpable. You think you're better than us, that you can just replace us? No, Nancy. I just chose not to settle for mediocrity, I replied, pulling up reviews on my phone and pushing it across the counter towards them. Read these. Customers didn't leave because of me. They left because of dirty rooms, rude service, and poor quality. They left because you refused to change. She glanced at the screen, then looked away, her mouth tightening. And now, she hissed, turning her wrath back to Tom, you've let her destroy everything your father built. Tom's face crumpled, and for a moment, I felt a pang of old affection, quickly smothered by years of strain. Nancy turned back to me, desperation in her voice. Give him a job, then. Take him on here. We're drowning in debt. We're going to close down. I looked at Tom, seeing the man I once loved, the man who sided with his mother against me when I needed him most. I'm sorry, Tom. I'm running a business, not a charity. Please leave my property, or I will have to call the police. They left, Nancy muttering under her breath, Tom silent. Watching them go, I felt a chapter close, one filled with hard lessons and tougher resolutions. Since then, my laundry continued to thrive. Word of mouth and positive online reviews kept new customers coming. I eventually decided to leave the clinic altogether, pouring my heart into this venture that had started as a challenge and turned into my passion. My name is Carly, and I never thought my life would turn into such a roller coaster. It all started when I was working as a perfume sales manager at a high-end department store. One day, a tall, handsome guy walked into the store. He looked nervous, fidgeting with his phone as he approached the counter. Hi, he said, his voice a bit shaky. I need help choosing a perfume for my mom. I couldn't help but find his concern for his mother endearing. Don't worry, I reassured him. We'll find something perfect. Let's start with some popular choices. As we sampled different fragrances, I learned his name was Michael. He was 28, worked for his family's construction company, and lived nearby. We chatted easily, and I found myself drawn to his warm brown eyes and shy smile. After nearly an hour, we finally settled on an elegant floral scent. As I wrapped up the bottle, Michael hesitated. Carly? Would you like to grab coffee sometime? My heart skipped a beat. I'd love to, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. That coffee date turned into dinner, which led to more dates. Michael was sweet, attentive, and made me laugh. We shared similar interests in movies, hiking, and trying new restaurants. Before I knew it, we were officially a couple. Everything was perfect until the day I met his mother, Evelyn. Michael had warned me she could be a bit intense, but nothing prepared me for the reality. We arrived at a fancy restaurant for a family dinner. Evelyn sat at the head of the table, her sharp eyes scrutinizing me as we approached. She was impeccably dressed, her graying hair styled in a severe bun. So, this is the girl you've been seeing, she said, her tone cold. She barely acknowledged my extended hand, giving it a limp shake. Michael's father, Robert, seemed nice enough, offering a warm smile. His older brother, Thomas, gave a curt nod. As we sat down, Evelyn launched into an interrogation. Where did you say you work, Carly? I'm a perfume sales manager at. She cut me off. Retail, how quaint. And your family? What do your parents do? I tried to keep my voice steady. My dad's a high school teacher, and my mom. A teacher? Evelyn's eyebrows shot up. Well, I suppose someone has to do it. The dinner continued in this vein, with Evelyn making thinly veiled insults and dismissive comments. Michael squeezed my hand under the table, but said nothing to defend me. As we left the restaurant, Evelyn pulled me aside. Listen carefully, Carly, she hissed. I run this family. I decide what's best for my sons. If you want a future with Michael, you'll need to prove your worth. I was too shocked to respond. When Michael proposed, I was over the moon. But my joy was short-lived. Evelyn immediately took over the wedding planning, dictating everything from the venue to the guest list. I tried to stand up for myself. Actually, I had some ideas. Ideas are nice, dear, Evelyn cut in, but let's leave this to the professionals, shall we? Michael gave me a pleading look. Just go along with it, he whispered. It's easier this way. And so, I watched as my dream wedding transformed into Evelyn's spectacle. I told myself it was just one day, that things would be different once we were married and living on our own. The first few months of marriage were a whirlwind. Michael and I moved into a small apartment, and I reveled in the joy of setting up our own space. But even as we unpacked boxes and arranged furniture, Evelyn's presence loomed large. She'd drop by unannounced, often when Michael was at work. Just checking in, she'd say, her eyes scanning our home critically. Oh dear, is this how you've arranged the living room? Let me show you a better way. I'd grit my teeth and smile, reminding myself that she was just trying to help. But her help felt more like an invasion. One evening, as Michael and I were having dinner, my phone rang. It was my boss, offering me a promotion to senior sales manager. I was thrilled. It was the opportunity I'd been working towards for years. The next evening, we sat around Evelyn's dining table. The tension was palpable as she served a roast that looked perfect, but tasted like cardboard in my mouth. Carly, Evelyn began, her tone sickly sweet. Michael tells me you've been offered a promotion. How nice. I nodded, trying to keep my voice steady. Yes, I'm very excited about it. Evelyn's smile tightened. Well, dear, I think it's time we discussed your future. Your real future. We need someone in sales, and with your experience, you'd be perfect. I took a deep breath. Evelyn, I appreciate the offer, but I'm happy in my current job. I don't want to leave it. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Evelyn's eyes narrowed. I see. So, you don't consider yourself part of this family then? I felt my temper rising. With all due respect, Evelyn, you don't get to decide what's best for my marriage or my career. Evelyn stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. I think you need to reconsider your priorities, young lady. Michael, talk some sense into your wife. As she stormed out of the room, I turned to Michael, expecting support. Instead, he looked torn. Carly, maybe we should think about this. Mom knows what she's doing. The drive home was silent, filled with unspoken words and growing resentment. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I realized that my battle wasn't just with Evelyn. It was with the entire dynamic of this family I had married into. The tension in our home grew thicker with each passing day. One Sunday afternoon, we were all gathered at Evelyn's for a barbecue. I was in the kitchen, helping to prepare salads, when Evelyn's voice carried from the patio. It's such a shame, she was saying loudly. I remember Thomas's ex-wife. She was just as ungrateful as Carly. But I showed her the door. I kicked her out of this family myself. I felt my cheeks burn. Thomas, Michael's older brother, shifted uncomfortably. Mom, please, he muttered. But Evelyn was on a roll. I'm just saying, a woman should know her place. Isn't that right, Robert? Robert, Michael's father, just grunted noncommittally. I'd noticed he rarely spoke up against his wife. I couldn't take it anymore. I marched out to the patio, salad bowl in hand. Evelyn, I said, my voice shaking slightly, if you have something to say to me, why don't you say it to my face? The backyard fell silent. Evelyn's eyes narrowed. Fine. You want to know what I think? I think you're not good enough for this family. You're stubborn, you're disrespectful, and you're pulling Michael away from his responsibilities. I felt like I'd been slapped. Responsibilities? You mean being your puppet? Carly, Michael pleaded. Please, let's not do this here. I whirled on him. And you? When are you going to stand up to her? When are you going to be a husband instead of a mama's boy? The moment the words left my mouth, I knew I'd crossed a line. Michael's face crumpled, and Evelyn looked triumphant. You see, she crowed. This is who you really are. A spiteful, ungrateful girl who doesn't appreciate what she has. I felt tears pricking at my eyes. Without another word, I turned and ran into the house, grabbing my purse and keys. The weeks following the barbecue incident were tense. Michael and I barely spoke, tiptoeing around each other in our own home. I threw myself into my work, staying late at the office to avoid the suffocating silence at home. One evening, I returned from work to find Michael sitting at the kitchen table, a serious expression on his face. We need to talk, he said. Mom called today. She wants us to come over for her birthday dinner next week. I felt a knot form in my stomach. Michael, I don't think that's a good idea. Please, he pleaded. It would mean a lot to me. And maybe it's a chance to start over? I wanted to refuse, to tell him I was done playing nice with a woman who clearly despised me. But the hope in his eyes made me hesitate. Fine, I said finally. But this is the last chance, Michael. I mean it. The night of Evelyn's birthday arrived, and I found myself standing in front of her door, a forced smile plastered on my face. As we entered, Evelyn greeted us with her usual fake warmth. Carly, dear, she cooed, air-kissing my cheek. So glad you could make it. I was worried you might be too busy with your little job. I bit my tongue, reminding myself to stay calm. The evening progressed with forced pleasantries and thinly veiled insults. I noticed how Evelyn dominated every conversation, her sons and husband merely nodding along. As the night wore on, Evelyn announced it was time for cake. Carly, be a dear and bring out the cake. And don't forget the candles. I headed to the kitchen, grateful for a moment's respite. I carefully placed the candles on the cake, counting under my breath to make sure I had the right number. Back in the dining room, I set the cake down in front of Evelyn. Her eyes narrowed as she counted the candles. Carly, she said, her voice dangerously sweet. There's one extra candle here. Can't you even do a simple task correctly? Or perhaps you're trying to insinuate something about my age? No, of course not, Enough, Evelyn snapped. She began plucking out the candles one by one. Since you've clearly ruined the design, you might as well see the mess you've made. Come closer, dear. Take a good look. Hesitantly, I leaned in. Suddenly, I felt a hand on the back of my head, pushing me down. Before I could react, my face was shoved into the cake. I gasped, struggling to breathe as frosting filled my nose and mouth. After what felt like an eternity, Evelyn released me. I straightened up, sputtering and wiping cake from my eyes. The room was silent, save for Evelyn's cruel laughter. Oh dear, she chuckled. Looks like someone's made a mess of themselves. I looked around the room in disbelief. The other guests were averting their eyes, some letting out nervous giggles. And Michael? Michael was staring at the floor, his face red with embarrassment. Without a word, I turned and fled to the bathroom, locking the door behind me. As I scrubbed the cake from my face, I could hear muffled voices outside. A soft knock came at the door. Carly? It was Michael. Are you okay? Do you need help? I yanked the door open, fixing him with a glare. Help? Now you want to help? He looked away, unable to meet my gaze. Mom can be a bit eccentric sometimes. We just need to. Eccentric? I hissed. Michael, she assaulted me. And you just stood there. Without another word, I pushed past him, grabbed my purse, and headed for the door. I drove home in a daze, my mind reeling from what had just happened. The days following Evelyn's birthday disaster were a blur of tears, arguments, and sleepless nights. Michael tried to apologize, but his words rang hollow. I threw myself into work, staying late at the office and taking on extra projects. But even at work, I couldn't escape Evelyn's influence. One afternoon, as I was assisting a customer, I heard a familiar voice that made my blood run cold. "Excuse me, I'd like to speak to a manager." I turned to see Evelyn standing there, a malicious glint in her eye. My colleague, unaware of who she was, directed her to me. "I'm the senior sales manager. How can I help you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Evelyn's lips curled into a cruel smile. "I have a complaint about the perfume I purchased here last week. The problem is that this perfume smells like cheap chemicals. And when I tried to return it, your staff was incredibly rude to me." I knew she was lying. We had a strict quality control process, and our return policy was more than fair. But before I could respond, she continued her tirade. "This is unacceptable. I demand to speak to your superior immediately." My manager, alerted by the commotion, hurried over. "What seems to be the problem here?" Evelyn launched into her fabricated story, painting me as an incompetent manager who had personally sold her a defective product and then refused to help. I tried to interject, to explain the situation, but my manager held up a hand to silence me. "I'm very sorry for your experience, ma'am. Please, come with me to my office. We'll sort this out immediately." As they walked away, Evelyn shot me a triumphant look over her shoulder. I stood there, humiliated and angry, as my colleagues whispered around me. An hour later, my manager called me into his office. His expression was grim. "Carly, I've received multiple complaints about your performance recently. And after today's incident, I'm afraid we're going to have to let you go." I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. "What? But those complaints, they're not real. It's my mother-in-law, she's trying to." He held up a hand. "Carly, please. I understand you're going through some personal issues, but we can't have them affecting your work like this. I'm sorry, but my decision is final." I left the office in a daze, my personal belongings in a small box. I drove home, tears blurring my vision. When I arrived, Michael was waiting, his face etched with concern. "Carly, what happened?" Mom said. "Your mother," I spat, "just cost me my job." I recounted the events of the day, my voice rising with each word. "And you want to know the worst part? She used our phone number to file those fake complaints." "Our phone number, Michael? The one you gave her without even asking me?" I locked myself in our bedroom, ignoring his pleas from the other side of the door. As I lay there, staring at the ceiling, I realized I was at a crossroads. I couldn't keep living like this, constantly under attack from Evelyn and unsupported by my own husband. The weeks following my job loss were some of the darkest I'd ever experienced. One evening, as I sat at our kitchen table, surrounded by job listings and unanswered applications, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "I hear you're looking for work. Maybe it's time to reconsider my offer. Evelyn." I stared at the screen in disbelief. How had she gotten my new number? I'd changed it specifically to avoid her. As if on cue, Michael walked in. I held up my phone. "Did you give your mother my new number?" His hesitation was all the answer I needed. "Look, maybe we should consider her offer. It's for us. For our future." I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor. "Our future? Michael, there won't be a future if this keeps up. If something doesn't change, and soon, I don't know if I can stay in this marriage." The silence that followed was deafening. Michael looked stunned, as if he couldn't quite process what I'd said. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'll talk to her. I promise. Just, give me some time." I wanted to believe him, but I'd heard similar promises before. Still, what choice did I have? I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. The next day, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I couldn't wait for Michael to stand up to his mother. I needed to find a job, to regain some semblance of independence. I reached out to an old colleague who had started her own online perfume business. She was sympathetic to my situation and offered me a position as an online consultant. The pay wasn't great, but it was something, a lifeline in the storm. But Evelyn wasn't done with me yet. As Christmas approached, the annual family gathering loomed on the horizon. I dreaded it, knowing it would be another opportunity for Evelyn to belittle and humiliate me. The night before the gathering, Michael and I had another argument. He wanted me to make more of an effort with his mother, to try to understand her perspective. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Her perspective? I sputtered. Michael, her perspective is that I'm not good enough for this family, that I should quit my job and become her puppet. How am I supposed to understand that? He looked away, unable to meet my eyes. She's just set in her ways. If we could just... No, I cut him off. I'm done trying. If you won't stand up for me, for us, then I'll have to do it myself. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I made a decision. Tomorrow, at the Christmas gathering, I would confront Evelyn once and for all. I was tired of being a victim, of letting her control my life. Christmas morning arrived, and with it, a sense of foreboding. We arrived to find Evelyn's house already bustling with activity. As we moved into the living room, I could feel Evelyn's eyes on me, assessing and judging. The rest of the family was already there, Robert, Thomas, and various aunts, uncles, and cousins. The afternoon progressed with forced pleasantries and thinly veiled insults. Evelyn, as usual, held court, dominating every conversation. I noticed how she kept bringing up the topic of children, her eyes darting to me each time. Finally, during dinner, she addressed me directly. "Carly, dear," she said, her voice dripping with false concern, "I couldn't help but notice you're not drinking. Any special reason?" I felt my cheeks flush as all eyes turned to me. "No, Evelyn. I'm just not in the mood for alcohol." Her eyes narrowed. Well, I do hope you're not having difficulties in that area. It's just, well, you're not getting any younger. And with your career struggles, I thought perhaps you'd be focusing on more important matters by now." I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor. "More important matters? You mean like being a submissive wife who gives up her dreams to please her mother-in-law?" Gasps echoed around the table. Evelyn's face contorted with rage. "How dare you speak to me like that in my own home?" "No, Evelyn," I shot back. "How dare you treat me like this? I am your son's wife, not your punching bag. I've had enough of your manipulation and your cruelty." I turned to leave, but as I passed Evelyn, everything seemed to happen in slow motion. Evelyn made a sudden movement, knocking over her mug of hot tea. The scalding liquid splashed directly onto me. I screamed in pain as the hot tea soaked through my clothes. Evelyn, however, seemed unfazed by what she had done. She grabbed my arm, pulling me close. "Listen here, you little brat," she hissed, her voice low and menacing. "You will obey me. You will do as I say. Or I will destroy you." Through the haze of pain, I looked around the room, desperate for help. But everyone, including Michael, seemed frozen in shock. Finally Michael stood up, his face pale. I need some air," he mumbled, before fleeing the room. In that moment, something inside me broke. Without another word, I wrenched my arm free and ran out of the house, ignoring the chaos erupting behind me. I drove to the nearest hospital, my skin still burning from the tea. As the doctors treated my burns, which thankfully weren't severe, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. When I finally returned home, the apartment was empty. I packed a bag with essentials, wrote a brief note explaining that I needed time away, and left. I woke up in the dingy motel room, my skin still tender from the burns. As I was contemplating my next move, my phone rang. I hesitated, half expecting it to be Michael or worse, Evelyn. To my surprise, it was my father-in-law, Robert. "Carly?" His voice sounded strained. "Can we meet? It's important." Curiosity got the better of me. "Okay," I said, giving him the motel address. An hour later, there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find Robert standing there, looking more disheveled than I'd ever seen him. His eyes were red-rimmed, and he seemed to have aged overnight. "Robert, what's going on?" I asked, gesturing for him to sit down. "Carly, I'm so sorry," he blurted out as soon as I let him in. "There's something you need to know about the company, about Evelyn." He paused, his hands shaking slightly. "The company, it used to belong to my parents. Evelyn, she tricked my father when he was sick. Made him sign everything over to her, made herself the executive director." I felt my jaw drop. "What? But how? Why didn't you say anything?" Robert's eyes filled with tears. "I was a coward. I'd been collecting evidence for years, but I was too afraid to do anything with it." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick folder. "But I can't stay silent anymore. Not after what happened yesterday. I need your help, Carly." With trembling hands, I opened the folder and began to read. What I found inside made my blood run cold. Evelyn had been hiding income for years, evading taxes on a massive scale. She'd been hiring undocumented workers, paying them a fraction of what they deserved and forcing them to work in appalling conditions. These workers, afraid of deportation, never complained about their treatment. But it got worse. The documents showed that many of the company's products were defective, failing to meet basic quality standards. Evelyn had been knowingly selling these subpar goods at full price, putting profits over people's safety. Then I came across a police report that made my heart stop. Thomas's ex-wife, who had worked in production, had discovered these illegal practices. She had threatened to report Evelyn to the authorities. In response, Evelyn had pushed her down a flight of stairs. The poor woman had sustained serious injuries, but Evelyn had intimidated her into silence. Shortly after, she had pressured Thomas into divorcing his wife. I looked up at Robert, my hands shaking. This is horrible. How could she do all this?" Robert broke down, tears streaming down his face. "I'm so sorry, Carly. I should have spoken up years ago. I was afraid. Of her, of losing everything. But I can't live with this guilt anymore." As I watched my father-in-law cry, a mix of emotions washed over me. Anger at Evelyn's cruelty and greed. Sympathy for Robert and all the workers who had suffered. And a growing determination to put an end to this injustice. We contacted a reputable lawyer, Amanda Chen, who specialized in corporate fraud cases. She listened to our story with growing concern and immediately agreed to take on the case. It was a Tuesday afternoon when all hell broke loose. My phone exploded with notifications, missed calls, text messages, and voicemails, all from Evelyn. I steeled myself and listened to one of the voicemails. "You ungrateful little witch." Evelyn's voice screeched through the speaker. "How dare you turn my husband against me? I'll ruin you for this, do you hear me? I'll destroy you." The barrage continued relentlessly. Evelyn called every few minutes, alternating between threats and attempts at manipulation. When I blocked her number, she started using other people's phones. But it didn't stop there. Evelyn launched a full-scale character assassination campaign against me. She contacted friends, family, and even my former co-workers, spinning a tale of how I had seduced Robert and turned him against her. The biggest blow came when Michael sided with his mother. He showed up at my new rented apartment, his face a mask of anger and betrayal. "How could you do this to us?" he demanded. "To my mother?" I tried to explain, to show him the evidence, but he refused to listen. "I don't know who you are anymore," he spat before storming out. As I sat there, reeling from Michael's rejection, I received an unexpected call. It was Thomas, Michael's older brother. "Carly? It's Thomas. I heard what's happening. I want you to know, I believe you. And I want to help." Thomas's support was a turning point. He provided additional evidence of Evelyn's misdeeds and agreed to testify in court. With his help, we were also able to locate his ex-wife, Maria. Maria's testimony was damning. She recounted in detail the incident where Evelyn had pushed her down the stairs, as well as the subsequent threats and intimidation. As the trial date approached, Amanda worked tirelessly. She tracked down several of the undocumented workers Evelyn had exploited. Despite their fear, many agreed to testify, their stories painting a horrifying picture of abuse and exploitation. The trial was grueling. Evelyn's lawyers fought dirty, trying to discredit our witnesses and paint Robert and me as conspirators. But Amanda was brilliant, methodically presenting our evidence and dismantling the defense's arguments. The turning point came when Amanda presented the evidence of how Evelyn had manipulated Robert's father into signing over the company. The judge listened intently as Amanda argued for the annulment of the will. After what felt like an eternity, the judge made her ruling. The will was annulled, and ownership of the company was returned to Robert. Furthermore, the judge ordered a full investigation into the company's practices and Evelyn's personal finances. As the gavel fell, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Robert broke down in tears beside me, while Evelyn's shrieks of outrage echoed through the courtroom. The aftermath of the trial brought sweeping changes to everyone involved. As soon as Robert took control of the company, Michael, true to his mother's influence, resigned from his position. He cut off all communication with his father, unable to forgive what he saw as a betrayal of his mother. Robert found unexpected support in Thomas. The father and eldest son, both having experienced Evelyn's manipulation firsthand, formed a strong partnership. Together, they began the arduous task of restructuring the company, determined to run it ethically and efficiently. The legal proceedings didn't end with the trial. Robert filed for divorce, a process that was surprisingly quick given Evelyn's fall from grace. In the settlement, he left her the house they had shared for decades. It was a generous gesture, considering everything that had happened. The court ordered a thorough audit of the company's finances, and the results were staggering. Years of creative accounting and tax evasion came to light. Evelyn was hit with a massive fine and ordered to pay $500,000 in back taxes. The house Robert had left her became her only asset, and she was forced to sell it to settle her debts with the tax authorities. Meanwhile, my own marriage had crumbled beyond repair. Michael's unwavering loyalty to his mother, even in the face of overwhelming evidence of her misdeeds, was something I couldn't comprehend or accept. We filed for divorce, and I felt a mixture of sadness and relief as I signed the papers. As I contemplated my next steps, Robert approached me with an unexpected offer. "Carly," he said, his voice warm with gratitude, "I know you've been through hell because of our family. But I want you to know that I consider you family still. We're rebuilding the sales department, and I'd like you to be a part of it. What do you say?" I was touched by his offer and, after some consideration, I accepted. Months passed, and slowly but surely, I found my footing. I learned to navigate the intricacies of the construction business, mastering the art of selling everything from lumber to specialized tools. My experience in luxury retail, surprisingly, proved valuable in dealing with high-end clients and custom projects. It was on a routine shopping trip that I had an unexpected encounter. As I turned down the cereal aisle, I froze. There, just a few feet away, stood Michael and Evelyn. They looked haggard, a far cry from the polished appearance they once maintained. Evelyn's voice, shrill and angry, carried clearly. "You weak-willed idiot," she berated Michael. "Can't you do anything right? I asked for the bran flakes, not this sugary garbage." Michael, his shoulders slumped, muttered an apology and reached for another box. I felt a pang of pity, seeing how their toxic relationship had endured and seemingly worsened. For a moment, I considered approaching them. But as I watched their dysfunctional interaction, I realized I had nothing to say. Instead, I quietly turned my cart around and left the store, leaving my shopping unfinished. My name is Anna, and this is the story of how I came to be the person I am today. I guess it all started with the family I was born into. My dad, Michael, was a mechanic with big dreams for his car repair shops, and my mom, Sarah, well, she was mostly just along for the ride. From the day I was born, it was pretty clear that my dad wanted a boy. I remember hearing stories from my Aunt Emily about how Dad's face fell when he first held me. Not exactly the warm welcome you'd expect for a newborn. I wanted a son, Sarah. You know that, I overheard him grumbling one evening. My mom, always trying to smooth things over, would just nod and try to change the subject. But she's healthy, Michael, isn't that what matters, she'd say. When I was 5, my little brother Lucas was born. That was the day I saw my dad smile, a smile that reached his eyes, a rarity in those days. He was over the moon, passing out cigars to anyone who would take one. Finally, a real heir to carry on the business, he boasted to his friends at the shop. Life at home shifted dramatically with Lucas's arrival. All of a sudden, it was like I became invisible. My dad spent his days off teaching Lucas about tools and engines, even before the kid could walk properly. Meanwhile, I was pretty much left to my own devices. If it weren't for my grandparents and Aunt Emily, I don't know how I would have coped. They lived just a few houses down, and I was at their place more than I was at my own. Aunt Emily was another lifesaver. She didn't have kids of her own and seemed to get that life at my house wasn't exactly peachy. We'd spend afternoons at the park, and she'd listen to me ramble about school or whatever book I was reading. You know, kiddo, you're smarter than you think, she'd tell me as we walked home from the park. Don't let anyone, not even your dad, make you feel like you're second best. I clung to those words, especially on days when the difference in how my parents treated Lucas and me was blindingly obvious. Like that one time when my dad came home with a brand new bike for Lucas. I remember standing there, hoping maybe there was one for me too. Why would you need a bike, Anna? It's not like you go out much, Dad said with a shrug when he saw me eyeing the bike. I ran out of the house, tears stinging my eyes, straight to my grandma's. She was in her garden, as usual, and without a word, she opened her arms wide, and I buried my face in her apron. Let them talk, Anna. You're going to outshine them all one day, you'll see, she whispered as she stroked my hair. One chilly morning in October, right after my 10th birthday, my grandparents decided to surprise me with something special, a cell phone. It wasn't anything fancy, just one of those basic models that could make calls and send texts, but to me, it might as well have been a diamond. We were in their cozy kitchen, the smell of freshly baked cinnamon rolls still lingering in the air. Grandma handed me a small, wrapped box with a mischievous twinkle in her eye. Go on then, Anna, open it up. It's high time you had one of these. As I tore off the wrapping paper and saw what it was, my eyes must have been as big as saucers. Really? For me? I squeaked, hardly believing it. Of course, for you. Grandpa chuckled, his voice booming warmly. Every young lady needs to stay connected these days. I spent the next few hours fiddling with the phone, setting it up with Grandma's help, and saving their numbers as my first contacts. But my excitement was short-lived. The next day, I made the mistake of taking my new phone home. I was in the living room, showing it off to Aunt Emily, who had dropped by, when Dad walked in from work. What's that you've got there? His tone was more curious than kind, his eyebrows knitting together as he peered at the phone in my hands. It's my new phone. Grandma and Grandpa gave it to me, I said, a bit too eagerly. Dad's face hardened in an instant, and he reached out, snatching the phone from my grasp. This is too much for a kid your age. Lucas needs this more than you do. But, I started to protest, but Aunt Emily put a hand on my shoulder, giving it a gentle squeeze, a silent signal not to argue. Lucas, who had been playing with his toy cars on the floor, looked up, clueless but interested in the sudden tension. Dad wasted no time, he shoved the phone into Lucas's hands. Here, son, you can have this. Learn to take good care of it. I felt a surge of anger and injustice boiling inside me, but before I could say another word, Aunt Emily steered me out of the room. Let's go for a walk, Anna. Cool down a bit, huh? Outside, Aunt Emily let out a long sigh. Your dad can be a real jerk sometimes, you know? But we've got your back. I don't get it, Emily. Why does he always do this? Why am I always the one who has to give up everything? My voice cracked, the hurt too raw to hide. Aunt Emily stopped walking and turned to face me, her expression serious. Listen, kid, life's not fair, especially not in your house. But remember, you're not alone. Let me talk to your grandparents. We'll sort this out. True to her word, Aunt Emily and my grandparents confronted Dad the following day. They didn't let up, arguing in hushed, tense tones in the dining room while I pretended not to listen from the stairs. Grandpa's voice was firm, a rare sternness to it. Michael, you had no right to take that phone from Anna. It was our gift to her, not yours to reassign to Lucas. Dad scoffed, dismissive as ever. Oh, come off it, Dad. It's just a phone. And Lucas is the one who needs it more. It's not about the phone, Mike. It's about respecting Anna and our choice to give her something. Grandma chimed in, her voice sharp with frustration. In the end, Dad grudgingly handed the phone back to me, his eyes avoiding mine. Here, take it. Just don't expect any more favors. Life has a way of throwing you curveballs, and mine came crashing down the autumn I turned 11. It was a day like any other. I was walking home from school, crunching the fallen leaves under my sneakers, when I noticed something off. The front door was open, and there were more cars parked outside our house than usual. As I walked in, the atmosphere hit me like a brick. My Aunt Emily was there, tears streaming down her face, while my parents stood off to the side, looking more annoyed than concerned. What's going on? I asked, dropping my school bag by the door. Anna, it's your grandparents, there's been an accident, Aunt Emily managed to say through sobs. A train accident, terrible thing, my dad added flatly, as if he was talking about a delayed delivery at his shop. The news shattered me. My grandparents weren't just family, they were my lifeline, the ones who made sure I felt loved when my own parents couldn't bother. Losing them felt like losing my entire world. The funeral was the hardest day. I remember standing there, the cold wind biting at my cheeks, listening to the murmurs of how tragic it was, how good they were, how unfair life could be. After the funeral, things moved quickly. My dad wasted no time. Emily, you need to clear out from their house. We're selling it. Need to cash in on the estate and settle things quickly, he said as we sat in the living room, still surrounded by condolence flowers. Aunt Emily, still raw from grief, looked at him like he was a stranger. Michael, can you hear yourself? Mom and Dad haven't even been gone a week, and you're already talking about money? Life goes on, Emily. We can't sit around and mope. There's a lot at stake. My mom chimed in, her voice cold and detached. That night, Aunt Emily packed up her things and moved into a small apartment just a few blocks from our house. She asked me to help her, probably to give me a break from the oppressive atmosphere at home. As we packed up her belongings, our conversation drifted to what was to come. Why are they so cold? How can they not care? I asked, frustration and sadness mingling in my voice. Some people just show their true colors at times like this, kiddo. But remember, you've got me. No matter what, I'm here, she assured me, pulling me into a hug. The loss of my grandparents was more than just an emotional blow, it changed my entire life setup. Suddenly, I was more of a maid than a daughter at home, cleaning and cooking because my mom decided it was time I learned to pull my weight. Aunt Emily's apartment became my refuge. It wasn't much, just a couple of small rooms, but it was filled with love and understanding, a stark contrast to the increasing coldness at my parents' house. I was still reeling from everything that had happened after losing my grandparents when life decided to throw me yet another curveball. It was a typical Friday afternoon. I had just come home from school, expecting to find the usual empty house until my parents and brother got back. But today, even the emptiness felt different, everything was too quiet, too still. I walked up to the front door and found it locked. My heart started pounding as I realized something was off. I rang the doorbell a few times, waited, but no answer. It wasn't long before Mrs. Jenkins, the nosy neighbor from across the street, came out. Looking for your family, Anna? She called out from her porch, her voice carrying a mix of concern and curiosity. Yeah, do you know where they went? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Oh, they packed up some bags and drove off early this morning. Said something about a weekend trip. Didn't they tell you? Her words hit me like a ton of bricks. No, they didn't, I managed to say, feeling the sting of tears in my eyes. How could they just leave me behind like that? Mrs. Jenkins shook her head, muttering something about some parents before disappearing back into her house. I sat down on the front steps, not sure what to do or feel. The sky started to darken, and as the street lamps flickered on, the reality of my situation sunk in. I was truly alone. Hours must have passed before I finally stood up and made my way to Aunt Emily's apartment. The walk felt longer than usual, each step heavier with the weight of abandonment. When I finally got there and knocked, Aunt Emily opened the door almost immediately, worry etched all over her face. "What's wrong, Anna? What are you doing here so late?" she asked, pulling me inside. "Mom and Dad, they went away for the weekend. They locked the house and didn't tell me. I didn't know where else to go," I confessed, my voice breaking as the tears I'd held back started to flow. Aunt Emily's face hardened as she heard this, her usually warm eyes now sparking with anger. "They did what? That's it. I'm calling your father." She dialed the number, and after a few tense moments, Dad answered. I could only hear one side of the conversation, but Aunt Emily's tone was enough to tell me it wasn't going well. "Yes, Michael, your daughter, my niece, is here with me because you left her behind," she snapped into the phone. "No, this isn't just a little mistake. You can't just lock your child out and take off for the weekend." There was a pause as she listened to whatever excuse he was making up on the other end. "Well, if that's how you feel, then maybe Anna should just stay with me from now on." "Yeah, maybe that's for the best." She hung up before he could respond, her chest heaving with every angry breath. Then, turning to me, her expression softened. "You're staying here tonight, Anna. And as long as you need to. We'll figure this out together." Over the next few days, Aunt Emily made arrangements for me to stay with her permanently. My parents didn't object, perhaps out of indifference. Either way, it didn't matter to me anymore. Life with Aunt Emily was a breath of fresh air after everything that had happened. Even though her apartment was small and our budget tighter than ever, it felt like a mansion compared to the emotional prison of my parents' house. One Saturday morning, we sat at the tiny kitchen table, planning our budget with more precision than a military operation. Aunt Emily had always been resourceful, and now she passed on those skills to me. We clipped coupons, planned our meals around grocery sales, and even started a small herb garden on the windowsill to save money on spices. "So, we've got $20 left for the month. Think we can splurge on a little ice cream?" Aunt Emily asked, her eyes twinkling with mischief. I laughed, shaking my head. "Only if it's on sale. Remember, we're the queens of bargains now." That light-hearted moment underscored our new reality. We were in this together, come what may. School became another arena where I had to adjust. At first, I was the girl whose family drama was whispered about in the corridors. But I held my head high, focusing on my studies and finding solace in books and learning. Mrs. Carter, my English teacher, noticed my diligence. One day after class, she called me over. "Anna, I've seen you pushing yourself hard this year. Ever thought of joining the debate team?" I hesitated, unsure. "I don't know, Mrs. Carter. I'm not sure I'd be any good at arguing." She smiled, her gaze kind but firm. "It's not just about arguing, Anna. It's about learning to stand up and speak out. Think about it." I did think about it, and with a nudge from Aunt Emily, I joined. Debate turned out to be more than just a club, it was a place where I could hone my voice, a skill I'd need more than I realized. Aunt Emily was my biggest cheerleader. "You're going to knock them dead at the competition," she'd say every time I left for a debate meet, her pride evident even though she tried to play it cool. Life wasn't just about surviving anymore, it was about thriving, about building something new from the ashes of my old life. Aunt Emily and I became a team, both of us working part-time jobs to keep afloat. She found work at a local library while I took a weekend job at a coffee shop. One evening, as we counted our month's earnings and updated our budget ledger, Aunt Emily put down her pen and looked at me seriously. "Anna, I think it's time you think about college. You've got the brains for it. We can make it work, somehow." From that day on, our plans included college. We researched scholarships late into the night, crafted essays, and filled out applications with painstaking care. Each acceptance letter was a victory, every scholarship a triumph, not just for me, but for us both. College was a whirlwind. I hit the books hard, fueled by every memory of being underestimated back home. Living on campus was different from anything I'd experienced, but I adapted quickly, driven by a mix of excitement and the pressure to prove myself. My roommate, Jess, became one of my closest friends. She was studying business, and we'd often sit up late into the night, swapping study tips and planning our futures. "You ever think about what you'll do after this, Anna?" Jess asked one evening, her book sprawled across our tiny dorm room floor. "I'm going all the way," I replied without hesitation. "Law school. I want to make a difference, you know? Really change things." I thrived on it, pushing myself to be better every day. The long hours and endless reading were exhausting, but every time I wanted to quit, I'd think of Aunt Emily and her belief in me, and that would be enough to keep me going. During my final year, one of my professors, Professor Carter, called me into his office. He was a stern man, known for his tough grading, but he respected hard work. "Anna, your thesis on family law was exceptional. Have you thought about where you might want to work after graduation?" he asked, peering at me over his glasses. "I've been looking at several firms, sir. I want somewhere I can really get into family law, maybe even start a specialty in it," I said, trying to sound as confident as I felt. "Well, I have a recommendation for you. A firm downtown is looking for bright, new talent. I can put in a good word," he offered, his tone suggesting it wasn't an offer he made lightly. "Thank you, Professor Carter. I'd appreciate that very much," I replied, a mix of gratitude and excitement swirling in my chest. I landed the job at the firm right after graduation. It was a prestigious place, the kind where you either sank or swam. I chose to swim. Days turned into nights as I worked on case after case, earning a reputation as a meticulous and fierce advocate. It was at a networking event hosted by the firm where I met Michael, a businessman with a keen interest in the intersections of law and commerce. Our first conversation was about a case I was working on, but it quickly turned personal. 2 years later, we got married in a small ceremony. Aunt Emily was there, tears of joy streaming down her face as she watched me say my vows. "You did it, Anna. You really did," she whispered as she hugged me tight. With Michael's support, I took the biggest leap of my career. I opened my own law firm. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once, but I was ready for the challenge. We moved to another state where the market was ripe for a new firm, especially one led by a woman with a fresh perspective. Our firm quickly made a name for itself, and as my professional life flourished, so did my personal life. Michael and I welcomed a son, a joyous addition to our family. Life was full, busy, and deeply satisfying. My law firm's success was more than I could have hoped for, and with each successful case, my reputation grew. This caught the attention of local media, and soon, I was invited to speak on TV about domestic violence. The interview went well, sparking discussions across various social platforms. I received an invitation from the governor's office. I was to be recognized for my contributions to child welfare and family law. As I gave my acceptance speech, thanking those who supported me, I saw Aunt Emily wiping away tears. It was a moment of validation for all the hardships we'd endured together. One day, after a particularly long day at the office, I was walking through the parking lot towards my car when I noticed 2 elderly people looking around uncertainly. As I approached, wondering if they needed help, the recognition hit me hard. They were my parents, who had walked out of my life 20 years ago. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice cool, masking the surprise and rising unease. "Oh, Anna, it's you. We saw you on TV, we knew it was you immediately. We've missed you so much and are so proud of all you've accomplished," my mom said, her voice trembling with emotion. "We wanted to reconnect, to be a family again," my dad added, his eyes searching mine for any sign of warmth. I took a moment to gather my thoughts before responding. "My family consists of my aunt, my husband, and my son. You chose to leave that family a long time ago. But instead of understanding, they became more insistent. Anna, you're our daughter. We need your help now. Your brother left us, and our business is failing. We have debts, no savings, and we're about to lose our house," my dad explained, his voice desperate. They even hinted at taking legal action if I refused to help, arguing that as their daughter, it was my duty. I couldn't help but laugh, though it was more from disbelief than amusement. "Really? You think you can intimidate a lawyer into helping you? You might want to think twice about that," I said sharply. Seeing that their threats were getting them nowhere, they shifted tactics, playing on my emotions. "Think about it, Anna. We're your parents. How can you turn us away?" "I remember very clearly," I replied, my voice steady and firm. "How you threw out Aunt Emily and left me behind like I was nothing." Realizing they were getting nowhere, they finally backed down. I handed them some money for their trip back, more out of pity than any sense of duty. "This is all I can do for you. Please, don't contact me again." When I got home, I hugged Michael and our son a little tighter. Aunt Emily greeted me with her usual warm smile, and in that moment, I knew I had everything I needed. After meeting my parents, one question lingered in my mind: what had become of Lucas? I utilized my contacts in the police and political circles to track him down. It took weeks of inquiries and waiting, but finally, I got a lead. Lucas had turned his back on our father's dreams of him becoming a mechanic and instead, had embraced his passion for art, living in a distant artist's commune. I hesitated for a moment before calling him. "Hello?" His voice was cautious, tinged with a curiosity that echoed my own. "Lucas, it's Anna. Your sister," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. There was a pause, heavy with years of unsaid words. "Anna, wow, this is unexpected. I know it's been a long time. I found out where you were. I hope it's okay that I called." Yeah, of course," he replied, the initial shock giving way to a more relaxed tone. "How did you find me?" I asked around. I needed to know you were okay," I admitted. The conversation began awkwardly, with each of us tentatively probing the years we'd missed in each other's lives. We agreed to meet at a small cafe halfway between our homes, a neutral ground to rediscover the sibling relationship we'd lost. Sitting across from Lucas a few days later, the initial awkwardness was palpable. "So, you're an artist now?" I ventured, eager to bridge the gap. Lucas smiled, a genuine, proud smile. "Yeah, I am. It's been a tough ride, but I wouldn't change it for anything." He pulled out his phone and scrolled through photos of vibrant paintings, each a burst of color and emotion. "I'm hoping to make a real go of it." His work was impressive, and I felt a surge of pride. "They're beautiful, Lucas. You've really found your calling." He shrugged modestly. "I'm trying. Dad, he never understood. He wanted me in the shop, but that life was never for me." We talked for hours, gradually easing into a comfortable camaraderie, reconnecting not just as siblings, but as adults who had navigated their own trials. "I could introduce you to some people in the art world," I offered, eager to help him pave his way to success. Lucas shook his head, a determined glint in his eye. "Thanks, Anna, but I need to do this on my own. I want to prove to myself, and maybe a bit to Dad, that I can make it without any handouts." His words echoed my own journey, and I couldn't help but respect his decision. "I understand. Just know I'm here, okay? Whatever you need." As we parted ways, Lucas handed me one of his smaller paintings, a beautiful landscape bathed in sunset hues. "For you, to remember today." Driving home, I placed the painting on the passenger seat, a smile playing on my lips. Lucas and I were more alike than I'd realized, We were both determined to forge our own destinies, independent yet connected by our shared resilience. Growing up, our house was like a fortress of strict rules and sharp expectations. I'm Emily, by the way. My dad, Richard, co-owned a big tech company and believed in running our family like a corporate boardroom. My mom, Helen, stayed at home, her life revolving around maintaining the perfect household and making sure me and my sister, Anna, stayed on track, her version of track. Anna, 3 years my senior, was the star child. She aced everything without even trying. Or so it seemed to me, always stumbling in her shadow. Our parents, especially Dad, made it clear they had high hopes for us. Hopes that pretty much mapped out our entire lives: top grades, elite college, prestigious careers. This particular evening was like any replay of a tired old sitcom. Dinner was tense. The clinking of cutlery on fine china always seemed louder when the air was thick with expectation. Dad's eyes darted from Anna to me, like he was mentally tallying points on some parental scoreboard. "So, Anna, your economics teacher called today. She's impressed with your latest project. Said it was college-level work," Dad announced, his voice tinged with pride. Anna smiled, the perfect daughter glow up on full display. "Thanks, Dad. I really pushed myself with this one." His gaze swung to me. "And Emily, how are your grades?" "Still struggling with calculus, I hear." The food in my mouth turned to sawdust. I nodded, not trusting my voice. Anna's eyes flickered my way, a glimmer of sympathy before she quickly masked it. "Math isn't my thing, Dad. You know I'm more into." "Math is everyone's thing if they put in the effort," he cut me off. His tone wasn't mean, just matter of fact, as if he was discussing the weather or a stock market trend. Mom chimed in, her voice softer, but no less insistent. "Your father's right, Emily. You can't just give up, because something doesn't come easily. Look at Anna. She works hard. Why can't you be more like her?" I bristled. "I do work hard. Just not at things that matter to you." Dad's eyes narrowed. "What does that mean?" "It means I have other interests. Like art." He scoffed, shaking his head. "Art is a hobby, Emily. It won't pay your bills or build a future. You need to be realistic." I pushed my chair back, the leg screeching against the tile floor. "Excuse me, I need some air." As I left, Dad's voice followed me. "We're only saying this for your own good, Emily." Outside, the cool evening breeze was a small relief from the stifling dining room. Their expectations were like chains, heavy and cold, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't seem to break free. Not like Anna, who wore those expectations like a crown, always poised, always perfect. But that night, under the starry sky, I made a silent vow. One day, I'd find a place where I wasn't just Anna's lesser shadow. A place where I could be me, whatever that meant, without apology or comparison. In our house, everything was a competition, especially for my sister Anna and me. My dad had this belief that pitting us against each other was the way to breed success. He'd say stuff like, "Competition sharpens the mind," but all it did for me was grind my confidence into dust. I mean, imagine screwing up a math problem and then going to school with a rumbling stomach the next day because of it. That was my reality. Anna always came out on top. Whether it was math, science, or any school subject, she nailed it. Because of that, she was the golden child, the one who wore new clothes and had lunch packed with more than just leftovers. On the other hand, I was the one in faded jeans, trying to get by on scraps. Dad made sure of it. "You need to push harder, Emily," he'd say at the dinner table, barely looking up from his plate as he compared our report cards. "Look at your sister. She's setting the bar. Meet it or go hungry." The unfairness of it all could choke you. My mom, Helen, always backed him up too. "Your father's right," she'd add, in that quiet voice of hers that somehow sliced deeper than any shout. "We only want what's best for you." But I had a different idea of what was best for me. My room was my refuge, a small space crammed with paints, brushes, and canvases. I wasn't any good with numbers or business strategies, but give me a brush, and I could make magic. One late afternoon, after another crushing round of comparisons where I came up lacking, I escaped to my room, slamming the door behind me. I needed to drown everything out, the disappointment in Dad's eyes, Mom's sighs, Anna's awkward attempts to make me feel better. Painting was my escape, my secret world. I was mixing some blues and greens, trying to capture the storm inside me on the canvas, when Anna knocked softly. "Emily, can I come in?" I didn't have it in me to send her away, so I just grunted. "Yeah, whatever." She stepped in, hovering by the door. Her eyes roamed over my makeshift studio, lingering on the unfinished canvas. "That looks amazing, Em." "It's just a storm," I muttered, focusing on blending the colors, letting the brush strokes express my frustration. "No, I mean it. You really have something here. Why don't you show them?" I scoffed, a harsh laugh escaping me. "Yeah, right. Look, Dad, forget about my crappy grades and check out this painting I made. That'll really impress him." Anna bit her lip, looking like she wanted to argue, but instead, she shifted the topic. "Just, don't let him stop you, okay? You're good. Really good." The last year of school crushed me under its weight. Anna had sailed into the Faculty of Management at the prestigious university everyone expected us both to attend. Me? I was barely scraping by, my heart not in the endless formulas and business strategies that piled up on my desk. The day the college acceptance letters were due, the atmosphere at home was electric with tension. I already knew what the letter would say, or rather, what it wouldn't. Dragging myself downstairs, I found both my parents in the living room, the dreaded letter lying like a verdict on the coffee table. Mom's face was stormy as she waved the letter at me. "Care to explain this?" I took a deep breath, bracing for the explosion. "I didn't get in." "And you're not even upset?" Mom accused. Her voice was sharp, like she could cut me open and find the answers she wanted. "Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is? Your sister got in with flying colors, and here you are, failing." "I'm not Anna," I shot back, my patience fraying. "That's the problem. You never try hard enough. You're going to end up a stupid beggar." Her words stung, but not as much as they used to. I was too tired, too worn down from fighting a battle I never chose. "I don't want to be a businesswoman," I said quietly, the truth finally spilling out. "I want to be an artist." The room went deadly quiet. Dad, who had been silently brooding by the window, turned sharply. His voice was cold and furious. "You want to what? Throw your life away?" "It's my life," I retorted, feeling a spark of defiance. "Not yours. I've never wanted this. I've never wanted any of this." "You ungrateful child," Dad hissed, his face red with anger. "If you think you can choose such a worthless path, you can get out. Get out and don't come back." His words hung heavy in the air. I looked from him to Mom, who was shaking her head, tears of frustration, or was it disappointment, in her eyes. "Fine," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'll leave. I don't need this. I don't need any of you." As I stormed upstairs, my heart pounded so loudly I could barely hear my parents arguing in the background. I shoved my clothes, my sketchbooks, a few cherished art supplies into a bag. With each item, I felt a chain breaking, a piece of the old, suffocating life falling away. When I walked out the door, suitcase in hand, Dad's final words were a cold goodbye. "You're no daughter of mine anymore." I stepped out into the unknown, the evening air cool and slightly biting against my face. It was scary, and for a moment, I didn't know what to do or where to go. But as I walked down the street, the weight of years of expectations lifted off my shoulders, and I realized I was free. The only place I thought of going was Grandma's. She had always been the soft counter to Dad's strict rules, a quiet rebel who nurtured my love for painting, despite his disapproval. So, with my world turned upside down, I found myself dragging my suitcase up her garden path, the familiar scent of her rose bushes somehow reassuring. Knocking on her door, my heart was thumping wildly, half out of fear, half out of relief. When she opened the door and saw me standing there, her expression shifted from surprise to concern in a heartbeat. "Emily, what in the world?" She didn't finish her sentence, just pulled me into a warm hug that smelled like vanilla and fabric softener. "I left home, Grandma," I managed to say, my voice muffled against her shoulder. Come in," she ushered, leading me into the cozy kitchen where a kettle was already whistling on the stove. Once we were seated at her table, a cup of tea in front of each of us, I told her everything. How Dad had disowned me, how Mom just stood there, how I couldn't bear to live under their roof a moment longer. Grandma listened, her eyes softening with each word I spoke. "You did what you had to do, dear," she said once I'd finished. "And you'll always have a home here with me." Relief washed over me, the tension I'd been carrying dissipating slightly. "Thank you, Grandma. I don't know what I would do without you." She reached across the table, squeezing my hand. "Now, tell me about your plans." "I know you, Emily. You must have a plan." Taking a deep breath, I shared my secret hope with her. I applied to the Institute of Arts. On the internet, quietly. I didn't tell Mom and Dad. Grandma's face broke into a wide smile. "That's wonderful. Following your heart, that's my girl." The conversation shifted to lighter topics for a while, allowing me to breathe easier and feel momentarily carefree. But later that evening, as we were cleaning up after a dinner of her homemade lasagna, my phone buzzed with an email notification. I checked it, not expecting much. "It's from the Institute of Arts," I said, a knot forming in my stomach. Grandma dried her hands quickly and came over to stand beside me. "Well, open it, dear," she urged, her voice tinged with excitement. With a shaky hand, I tapped on the screen and read the contents of the email, my eyes widening with each word. "I got in, Grandma. I got in, and they're offering me a scholarship. Full tuition covered." "Oh, Emily!" Grandma exclaimed, her eyes brimming with tears as she pulled me into another hug. "I knew it. I always knew you had something special. This is just the beginning for you." We spent the rest of the evening talking about the future, about art and dreams, and making a new life. It felt like for the first time in a long time, I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Grandma's faith in me bolstered my own, and I felt ready to take on this new challenge. A few days later, Grandma accompanied me to the Institute to finalize my registration. Walking through the halls filled with vibrant art and buzzing with creative energy, I felt a sense of belonging that had eluded me for years. "You're going to do great things, my dear," Grandma whispered as we left the administration office, my enrollment confirmed. Living on campus was a world away from everything I'd known. For the first time, I was not just studying what I loved, I was immersed in it. The transition wasn't easy, though. Drawing had been something I sneaked around doing back home because my parents had made it clear they didn't see a future in it for me. But here, at the Institute of Arts, it was my life. My first year was tough. The freedom to create was exhilarating, but also daunting. I struggled initially, battling the ingrained fear of my parents' disapproval and the pressure to prove I could make it on my own. Yet, with every sketch and painting, I grew more confident. By the end of the year, not only had I found my footing, but I had also emerged as one of the top students in my class. Professors praised my unique style, and I started to believe maybe I did have something special. As my skills developed, so did recognition. The school offered a few of us, the so-called emerging talents, a chance to showcase our work at a personal exhibition. I jumped at the opportunity. Preparing for the exhibition was intense. Every piece had to say something, to stand out. I poured my heart into each painting, hoping they were good enough to be noticed. The night of the exhibition was surreal. The gallery was buzzing with people, music softly playing in the background, lights casting a perfect glow on the paintings. I stood nervously by my work, watching as people walked by, stopping to look, to discuss. My grandmother, who had come to see the exhibition, stood beside me, her eyes wet with pride. You've done well, Emily, she whispered, squeezing my hand. I'm so proud of you. That night, something incredible happened. A local TV crew, who had come to cover the exhibition, featured my work. Suddenly, I wasn't just a student, I was an artist being talked about. The segment aired, and the next thing I knew, I was being invited to talk about my art on various shows. My paintings started circulating on the internet, gaining popularity. It was all so fast, so big. I felt like I was dreaming. The real pinch-me moment came when an animation studio contacted me. They wanted to use my designs for a series. Next thing, those sketches and characters I created in the solitude of my studio were moving, living on screens. They even started a comic book series based on them. And yeah, they paid me, which felt weird but incredible. I remember sitting in my dorm, watching the first episode of the animated series, thinking about how far I'd come. From hiding my sketches from my parents, to seeing my creations come to life on TV, it was mind-blowing. I was in my studio on campus, streaks of paint on my hands, and a blank canvas waiting, when my phone rang. It was Anna. I hesitated for a moment, not sure what to expect. We hadn't talked much since I left home. Emily? It's Anna, she said, her voice uncertain. I saw you on TV last night. You were amazing. Thanks, I replied, taken aback by her call and her compliment. I appreciate it, Anna. How's school going for you? It's fine, she said, though her tone suggested otherwise. Actually, that's partly why I called. I've been thinking a lot about what I'm doing. I'm not sure I'm as cut out for the business world as Dad thinks. Watching you follow your passion made me wonder if I'm just going along with what's expected of me, not what I want. This was new. Anna, the perfect student, doubting her path? It's never too late to change your course, you know. If you're not happy, maybe it's time to think about what you really want, I said, more as a friend than as her estranged sister. Yeah, right, she laughed softly. Maybe I need a bit of your courage. We can share some of mine. I've got plenty to go around now, I joked, easing the tension. A few weeks later, Anna came to visit me. She toured my studio and my latest works, her interest genuine. It was strange but comforting to have her in my space, seeing the part of my life that had caused so much distance between us. You really are talented, Emily, Anna said as she looked around at the paintings, the sketches, and the splashes of color everywhere. It's my world, I told her, feeling a surge of pride. Wanna try? She hesitated, then smiled. Why not? Handing her a brush felt symbolic, like I was welcoming her into my life in a way we hadn't shared since we were kids. As Anna and I laughed over her crooked paint strokes, I realized that this recognition was all I had really wanted from the start. As our laughter died down, Anna's expression turned serious. You know, when Mom and Dad found out about your TV spot and the shows, they were furious. Dad said you're defaming the family name with your doodles. They really don't get it, Em. The words stung, but I wasn't surprised. Let them think what they want, I said, shrugging. I'm not living for them anymore, Anna. I'm living for me. And for the art. Yeah. Anna nodded, looking around at all the colors and shapes that filled my world now. You've built something beautiful here, Em. Don't ever let them tell you otherwise. Hearing that from Anna, knowing that she saw the value in what I was doing despite our parents' disapproval, meant everything. It solidified my resolve to keep going, no matter what they said or did. I was an artist, and that was something no one could take away from me. It had been 6 months of peace and creativity when it all came crashing down during one of my exhibitions. I was showcasing some of my latest work, which had drawn a decent crowd, buzzing with chatter and admiration. That's when my parents stormed in, their faces thunderous. My father, his face red with anger, scanned the room until his eyes landed on me. Without hesitation, he marched over, my mother trailing behind him, her eyes darting nervously around the room. The moment he reached me, he erupted. This is what you left your family for? These ridiculous paintings? He gestured wildly at my art hanging on the walls. "You're shaming us, Emily. You think this is a real job? Artists are just drug addicts pretending to be profound." I was stunned, words failing me as his voice echoed off the gallery walls. Before I could gather my thoughts, he lunged at one of my paintings, his hands clawing at the canvas. I gasped, stepping forward, but the gallery organizer was quicker. He called security immediately. "Sir, you need to leave. Now," the organizer demanded, as two guards quickly intervened, pulling my father away from the damaged artwork. The aftermath was a blur of apologies from me to the guests and the gallery owner, assurances that this was an isolated incident. But the damage was done. The evening was ruined, and so was my mood. Over the next few days, my phone was bombarded with texts from both of my parents. Each message was a dagger, full of accusations and predictions of doom. "You'll come crawling back once you realize the real world isn't kind to dreamers," one read. "You think you're successful? This is just a phase," said another. I tried to ignore them, but each beep of my phone brought a fresh wave of anxiety. It wasn't until I received an email notification about the animated series based on my artwork that I found a sliver of vindication. The series had just crossed another 1,000,000 views, and the comments were overwhelmingly positive, praising the creativity and unique style. Fueled by a mix of anger and pride, I copied the link to the YouTube page and sent it to my parents with a simple message: "See for yourself." After that, the messages stopped. Their silence was louder than all their criticisms combined. Maybe, just maybe, they had watched the videos and read the comments. Perhaps they finally understood that my art was something real and valued by others, even if they couldn't see it themselves. 2 years had flown by when my sister Anna called me with news that shook our family to its core. Dad had lost his business due to a betrayal by a foreign partner, and they were financially ruined. They had to sell the house and move into a small apartment. What's more, Anna decided to leave the prestigious university she never truly loved and was planning to transfer to another college to study landscape design, something she was genuinely passionate about. During the holiday season, I visited Grandma's house, where Anna was now staying. She was beaming with genuine happiness, a stark contrast to the stressed sister I remembered. "I've got a scholarship, Emily," she told me as soon as I walked in. "I'm finally studying what I want, and I'll be living here with Grandma." "That's amazing, Anna. I'm so proud of you," I replied, embracing her tightly. Grandma joined in, hugging us both. "You girls are so talented," she said, her eyes twinkling with pride and love. Over the next 3 years, my career as an artist flourished. My paintings were featured in top galleries across the country, and I managed to carve out a name for myself in the competitive art world. My work sold for substantial amounts, allowing me to live comfortably and continue pursuing my passion. However, the past has a way of catching up. One day, as I was setting up a new series of paintings in my studio, my parents walked in. The sight of them was startling. Dad looked frail and worn, a shadow of his former self, and Mom was dressed far more modestly than I had ever seen. "Emily, we need to talk," Dad began, his voice weak but urgent. I nodded, leading them to a small sitting area in the corner of my studio. "What's going on?" I asked, although the tight knot in my stomach already had an inkling. "We're in a bad place, Emily," Mom started, her voice trembling. "We've lost everything, and we need your help." Dad coughed slightly before adding, "You've done well for yourself, which we knew you would, despite what we said. We were hoping you could lend us some money. Help us get back on our feet." The request hung heavily in the air, thick with irony and desperation. I took a deep breath, the memories of their dismissal and harsh words echoing in my mind. "You both disowned me when I chose this path. You said I would fail and wished me nothing but the worst," I reminded them softly, yet firmly. "Yes, but we're still your family," Dad insisted, looking at me with eyes that were pleading yet prideful. "I built this life on my own, without any help from you after you turned your backs on me. You made it clear then that you didn't want anything to do with me or my career," I continued, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. Mom looked down, tears starting to form in her eyes, while Dad simply stared, his expression unreadable. "I'm sorry, but I won't be giving you any money," I concluded, the finality in my voice mirroring the closure I felt in my heart. They stood, the air thick with tension and unspoken words. "We hope you reconsider, Emily," Mom said softly as they turned to leave. Watching them walk away, I felt a mixture of relief and sorrow. It was a difficult decision, but necessary to protect the life and boundaries I had fought so hard to establish. Hi, everyone. I'm Hannah, and I want to tell you about the time when my life took a surprising turn. I was 25 years old, working as an accountant at a company where I met Tom. Tom was the head of the marketing department, a pretty serious guy but with a charm that was hard to miss. At first, Tom and I were just colleagues. We exchanged polite hellos and discussed work stuff now and then. He was always busy, and I was too focused on my tasks to think much about him. But things changed at one of our company parties. It was one of those annual events where everyone let loose a little. The party was lively, with music blasting and people dancing everywhere. I wasn't much of a dancer, so I decided to take a break on the balcony, away from the noise. That's when Tom joined me. We chatted for a bit about work and the usual small talk. I noticed how his serious demeanor from the office melted away into a more relaxed and friendly vibe. We started talking about our lives outside work, our interests, and what we liked to do for fun. "So, what do you do for fun, Tom? I can't imagine you being anything but serious," I teased. He laughed. "Well, I enjoy hiking and playing the guitar. I guess I'm not all work and no play after all." As the conversation flowed, there was a moment of silence. We looked at each other, and without thinking, we leaned in and kissed. It was spontaneous, unexpected, but it felt natural. Pulling back slightly, Tom looked a bit surprised. "Wow, I didn't see that coming," he said, a bit breathless. "Me neither," I admitted, feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness. "But it felt right, didn't it?" "Yeah, it did," he agreed, smiling. The next day at work, there was a different energy between us. We started spending more time together, having lunch, and going for coffee breaks. Our first date was simple yet perfect. We went to a cozy little restaurant downtown. We talked for hours about everything, our childhood, our dreams, our fears. It felt like we had known each other forever. 2 years flew by, filled with countless memories and shared moments. One day, Tom suggested we take a trip to Hawaii. I was thrilled. Little did I know, he had something big planned. On the last evening of our trip, as the sun set on the beautiful beach, Tom got down on one knee and pulled out a ring. "Hannah, you've made me happier than I ever thought possible. Will you marry me?" I was overwhelmed with emotion. "Yes, Tom, I will," I said, tears of joy streaming down my face. We returned home, and the preparations for our wedding began. It was a whirlwind of excitement and planning. Tom introduced me to his parents, Nancy and John. They were a kind and welcoming couple, and I felt instantly at ease with them. We had a simple wedding, but filled with lots of laughter and joy, especially thanks to Tom's huge, fun-loving family. I never knew he had so many relatives who loved to party. After the wedding, Tom moved into my house, the one I inherited from my grandfather. It wasn't huge, but it was cozy, and I loved it. Tom insisted I become a housewife, and after thinking it over, I agreed. The idea of taking care of our home and spending more time with Tom sounded nice. The first 6 months of our marriage were like a dream. We were inseparable, spending every moment together. We'd go for long walks, binge watch our favorite shows, and just enjoy each other's company. The house felt so peaceful, and I loved making it our own little nest. Tom's parents, Nancy and John, started visiting us more often. They'd drop by unannounced, but I didn't mind too much at first. It was nice having them around, and they seemed to enjoy our company too. They often talked about their small rented apartment and how cramped it was. One evening, while we were having dinner, Nancy sighed heavily. I just wish we had more space, you know? That apartment is just so tiny. John nodded in agreement. Yeah, it's getting a bit claustrophobic. I tried to be sympathetic. I'm sure it's not that bad. At least you have each other, right? They laughed, but I could tell they weren't entirely happy with their living situation. Still, I didn't think much of it at the time. I was too focused on enjoying my life with Tom. As the weeks went by, Tom's parents continued to visit frequently. They'd stay for dinner and often hinted about how nice it would be to live in a bigger place. I tried to brush it off, focusing on the positive aspects of our time together. One afternoon, while I was preparing dinner, Nancy dropped by unexpectedly. Hi Hannah, I thought I'd keep you company while you cook. Sure, Nancy. I could use the company, I replied, trying to sound cheerful. She wandered around the kitchen, looking at everything. You know, this house is really nice. So much space and so cozy. Thanks, Nancy. I really love it here. She sighed again. Our place is just so small. It's hard to even move around sometimes. I felt a bit uncomfortable but didn't say anything. I didn't want to be rude. After all, they were Tom's parents, and I wanted to keep the peace. As the months passed, I noticed Tom was spending more time talking about his parents and their living situation. He'd bring it up during our dinners and casual conversations. Hannah, my parents really struggle in that tiny apartment. It's not fair for them, you know? I get it, Tom. But they seem to manage, right? Yeah, but still, I wish there was more we could do for them. I nodded, not knowing what else to say. I wanted to support Tom, but I also didn't want to disrupt the peace and comfort of our home. I hoped things would just work themselves out. One day, Tom came home and casually said, Hannah, my parents need to stay with us for a couple of weeks. Their apartment is getting renovated. I blinked, a bit taken aback, but wanting to be supportive. All right, Tom, I guess we can handle that, I replied, trying to stay positive. I figured I could get along with Nancy and John, since they seemed nice enough. A few days later, I saw a massive truck pull up outside our house. Movers started unloading a ton of furniture and boxes. I stood there, watching in disbelief as they filled our house with their stuff. What's all this? I muttered to myself, feeling a knot tighten in my stomach. Nancy and John arrived soon after, looking cheerful. Thanks for letting us stay, Hannah, Nancy said, patting me on the shoulder. I forced a smile. Sure, but why didn't you rent a storage room for all this stuff? Nancy waved her hand dismissively. Oh, I don't trust strangers with my things. It's just for a couple of weeks. I nodded, trying to hide my growing unease. For the first few days, they were polite and thanked me for letting them stay. I even started to relax a bit, thinking maybe it wouldn't be so bad after all. Tom suggested we have a family dinner to welcome them properly. I agreed, thinking it might help ease the tension. The night of the dinner, I worked hard to make everything perfect. I cooked a nice meal and set the table nicely. As we all sat down, Nancy and John seemed pleased. Thank you, Hannah, this is lovely, Nancy said, smiling. I smiled back, feeling a bit more at ease. I'm glad you like it. Welcome to our home. The dinner went smoothly, with everyone chatting and laughing. I started to think maybe this arrangement could work after all. Tom's parents seemed grateful, and I hoped we could all get along well during their stay. But as the days went by, I couldn't shake off the feeling of being overwhelmed by all their stuff crowding our house. Every room seemed to be filled with their belongings, and it felt like our space was shrinking. I tried to stay positive, reminding myself it was only for a few weeks. Despite the growing clutter, I continued to focus on keeping the peace. I cleaned up after them, cooked their meals, and tried to be a good hostess. Tom seemed pleased with how things were going, which helped me stay positive. One evening, as I was cleaning up after dinner, Tom came into the kitchen. Hannah, thanks for making this work. I know it's not easy having my parents here. I wiped my hands on a towel and smiled at him. I'm doing my best, Tom. I just hope it's only for a couple of weeks like you said. It will be, I promise, he assured me. I nodded, feeling a bit reassured. I hoped Tom was right and that this arrangement would be temporary. I could handle a few weeks, I told myself. As the days passed, I tried to focus on the positives. Nancy and John were generally polite and tried to be helpful in their own way. We had a few more family dinners, and I made an effort to include them in our daily routines. One morning, I decided to take a break from the house and go for a walk. I needed some fresh air and a bit of time to myself. As I walked around the neighborhood, I thought about how much our lives had changed in just a few days. When I got back home, Nancy was in the kitchen, making coffee. Morning, Hannah. How was your walk? It was nice, thanks, I replied, feeling a bit more refreshed. She smiled. Good. I'm thinking of baking some cookies later. Would you like some? I appreciated the gesture. Sure, that sounds great, Nancy. As I went about my day, I reminded myself that this was just a temporary situation. I could handle a few weeks of extra company and clutter. It wasn't ideal, but it was manageable. Things took a turn after a few days of my in-laws moving in. It started slowly, but soon became clear that Nancy and John were taking over our house. It began one morning when I was making breakfast. Nancy walked into the kitchen and wrinkled her nose at the spread. Hannah, what's this? Oatmeal again? We need some real food. Bacon and eggs would be nice. I clenched my jaw, but nodded. Fine, I'll make bacon and eggs tomorrow. The next day, I found Nancy in the living room, moving my favorite chair. This recliner needs a better spot. Don't you think, Hannah? I tried to keep my cool. Nancy, please ask before moving my furniture. She just shrugged. It's for the best, trust me. John wasn't any better. He'd park himself in front of the TV all day, snacking and leaving crumbs everywhere. I confronted him one evening. John, can you at least use a plate? The living room's a mess. He grunted without looking away from the screen. Yeah, sure, whatever. I felt like I was losing control of my own home. Every day, Nancy would find something new to criticize or change. One afternoon, I caught her rearranging the kitchen cabinets. Nancy, what are you doing? I asked, trying to stay calm. Oh, just organizing things better. Your system is a bit chaotic. It was getting harder to keep my patience. I talked to Tom about it that evening. Tom, your parents are taking over. They're changing everything and making a mess. He sighed, looking annoyed. Hannah, they're just trying to help. Can't you just let it go? I couldn't believe his attitude. It was like he didn't care about how I felt. I decided to try and manage things on my own, hoping they'd eventually leave as promised. The next morning, Nancy decided to critique my cleaning. Hannah, this house is dusty. Can't you do a better job? I bit back my frustration. I clean every day, Nancy. Maybe you could help out? Help out? I'm a guest here, remember? I walked away before I said something I'd regret. I was feeling more like a maid than a hostess. John was no help either. He'd leave dirty dishes everywhere, expecting me to clean up after him. One day, I found Nancy going through my closet. What are you doing in here? She didn't even look guilty. Just seeing if you have something I can borrow. We're about the same size. Nancy, you can't just go through my things. Ask first. She huffed and walked out, muttering under her breath. I felt like I was losing my mind. Tom's lack of support made it even worse. Every time I brought up an issue, he'd brush it off. The next morning, Nancy announced she was going to redecorate the guest bedroom. I think this room needs a new look. I'll bring in some new curtains and a bedspread. I stared at her, incredulous. Nancy, this is my house. You can't just change everything without asking. We're just trying to make it more comfortable, Hannah. You should be grateful. I felt a wave of anger and frustration, but decided to walk away. I needed to find a way to regain control of my home and my life. I hoped Tom would eventually see reason, but I wasn't holding my breath. Things had gone from bad to worse. Nancy, my mother-in-law, started taking my bank card without even asking. One day, I noticed charges on my account that I didn't make. It was Nancy, buying things for herself. I confronted her about it. Nancy, you took my card without asking. You can't do that. She looked at me, unbothered. Hannah, we needed a few things. What's the big deal? It's my card, Nancy. You need to ask first. She shrugged and walked away, leaving me fuming. I decided to talk to Tom about it, hoping he'd back me up. Tom, your mom's been using my bank card without asking. This has to stop, I told him that evening. He barely looked up from his phone. Hannah, it's just some groceries and stuff. She can use it, we live off my income anyway. I walked away, feeling defeated. It was clear Tom wasn't going to support me. I felt like I was losing control of my own finances, let alone my house. A month passed, and there was no sign of Nancy and John leaving. Every day felt like a struggle to maintain some sense of normalcy. They were constantly going through my things, rearranging the house, and demanding specific meals. One evening, during dinner, I decided to bring up the topic. Nancy, John, when do you think you'll be heading back to your apartment? They both laughed, and I looked at them, confused. Tom finally spoke up, Hannah, they're staying here indefinitely. I don't have the money to rent them a separate place right now. I stared at him in disbelief. What? Indefinitely? Tom, we didn't agree on this. They're my parents, Hannah. They need a place to stay. I felt a wave of depression wash over me. This wasn't what I signed up for. Now I was stuck serving my in-laws, who acted like they owned the place. The kitchen was another battleground. Nancy had specific demands for meals and wasn't shy about making them known. Hannah, I want roast beef for dinner tonight. Make sure it's done right, she instructed one morning. I bit my tongue, trying to stay calm. I'll see what I can do, Nancy. Every day felt like a struggle to keep my sanity. Tom was no help, constantly siding with his parents. I felt trapped in my own home, forced to cater to people who treated me like a servant. One evening, I decided I'd had enough. I needed to confront Tom and make him understand how miserable I was. Tom, this can't go on. Your parents are treating me like a servant, and it needs to stop, I said, my voice trembling with frustration. He shook his head. You're overreacting. Just deal with it. I felt tears of frustration welling up, but held them back. It was clear Tom wasn't going to change his stance. I knew I had to find a way to stand up for myself and take back control of my life. As the days went on, I tried to set firmer boundaries with Nancy and John, but it felt like a losing battle. They continued to overstep, and Tom continued to defend them. So, one day I went for a run to clear my head and ended up taking a nasty fall. I broke my leg and some good Samaritans called an ambulance for me. After a long day at the hospital, I finally got back home in a taxi, exhausted and in pain. When I hobbled through the door on crutches, Nancy and John were sitting in the living room, watching TV. Tom was there too, looking annoyed. Nancy glanced up and said, "Where's dinner, Hannah? We had to order pizza." I pointed to my leg, still throbbing with pain. I broke my leg. I couldn't cook. Tom chimed in, clearly irritated. "Hannah, stop pretending. You can still cook." Pretending? I was at the hospital all day, Tom. I shouted, feeling the frustration boiling over. "No need to get dramatic," Nancy said, turning back to the TV. I was forced to cook dinner on crutches the next day. It was a struggle, but I managed to get something on the table. Nancy and John still found reasons to complain. A few days later, we were having dinner when Nancy dropped another bombshell. We've invited our relatives over for Thanksgiving. Since you're laid up with that leg, you should move out for a couple of weeks. They'll need the space. I stared at her in disbelief. You want me to leave my own house? John nodded. It's just for a couple of weeks, Hannah. You'll be in the way with that leg. Tom just sat there, not saying a word. I looked at him, hoping for some support, but he avoided my gaze. You can't be serious, I said, feeling my patience snap. This is my house. I'm not going anywhere. Nancy crossed her arms, looking defiant. We've already told them they can stay here. I felt a surge of anger. You had no right to do that. This is my home, not yours. Tom finally spoke up. Hannah, just do it. It's only temporary. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You expect me to leave my house so your relatives can stay here? With my broken leg? You're being difficult, Hannah, Nancy said, her voice cold. I felt my blood boil, but then a strange calm washed over me. I smiled, feeling a surge of strength. No, Nancy, you get out of my house. Tom exploded. Hannah, you're a freeloader. You live off my money. If you don't do what my parents say, I'll divorce you. I kept my smile, feeling a strange sense of relief. Fine, Tom. I agree to the divorce. He looked shocked, clearly not expecting that. You'll regret this, Hannah. I stood up, steadying myself on my crutches. No, Tom. I'm done with all of you. Pack your things and get out. Tom stormed out of the room, fuming. He called the movers right then and there, and within a few hours, they were loading up the truck with their stuff. I watched them, feeling a mixture of relief and anger. I couldn't believe it had come to this, but I knew it was the right thing to do. They drove away, leaving me standing in the doorway, my leg throbbing but my heart feeling lighter. The next morning, I wasted no time. I called a locksmith and had the locks changed on the house. I wanted no chance of them coming back. With the new locks in place, I started cleaning the house, hobbling around on my crutches. My leg was healing slowly, but I was determined to get rid of every reminder of Tom and his parents. I gathered their leftover belongings, packed them into boxes, and put them by the door for donation. It was hard work, and I had to take frequent breaks, but each time I sat down, I felt a bit more at peace. I went through each room, removing anything that reminded me of them. I wanted my house to feel like mine again, free from the chaos they had brought into my life. Just when I thought I'd finally have some peace, something unbelievable happened. I was getting ready to spend Thanksgiving alone, looking forward to a quiet day. I had just put a pie in the oven when there was a loud knock on the door. I hobbled over to the door, still a bit sore from my leg injury. When I opened it, I couldn't believe my eyes. There stood Tom, Nancy, and a bunch of their relatives, all looking way too cheerful. Happy Thanksgiving, Hannah, Tom said with a big grin. I stared at them, stunned. What are you doing here? Nancy waved a key at me, looking annoyed. We couldn't get in. Why did you change the locks? I took a deep breath, feeling my anger rise. Because you're not welcome here anymore. I changed the locks, because you're strangers to me now. Tom laughed, clearly not taking me seriously. Come on, Hannah. I earn the money here. You can't just kick us out. I couldn't help but laugh too, but it was a bitter laugh. Tom, I've got savings from my grandfather. I don't need your money. I can take care of myself. Nancy's eyes lit up when she heard about the money. Oh, well, we came to make peace, Hannah. We should all live together as a family. I shook my head, feeling a strange calm. No, Nancy. I don't consider you my family anymore. Tom looked shocked, still not believing I was serious. You're really going to do this, Hannah? I nodded and pulled out the divorce papers I had prepared. Yes, Tom. Here are the divorce papers. I'm done. Nancy tried to push past me. Hannah, let's talk about this inside. I stepped in front of her, blocking the doorway. No, you're not coming in. If you don't leave, I'll call the police. They all stared at me, completely stunned. Tom tried one last time. Hannah, don't do this. Let's talk calmly. I shook my head. No, Tom. I'm finally doing what's right for me. Now leave. They muttered and scowled, but they finally turned and left, throwing insults over their shoulders, calling me cruel and arrogant. I watched them go, feeling a huge weight lift off my shoulders. I closed the door and locked it, leaning against it for a moment, feeling a mix of relief and sadness. It was over. I had stood up for myself and taken control of my life. As the days passed, I focused on healing and rebuilding my home. I got rid of everything that reminded me of Tom and his family, creating a space that was truly mine. It wasn't easy, but every step I took made me feel stronger and more in control. I reconnected with friends, started new hobbies, and slowly built a new routine that made me happy. I was no longer living in fear or frustration. I had my peace, my home, and my life back. Hey there, I'm Emma Clark. Born and raised in the small town of Harlow, nothing fancy, just a place where faces are familiar and secrets don't stay hidden for long. I made my way through college, diving straight into the world of retail after graduation. Lingerie wasn't just a product to me, it was a passion. I worked my tail off and eventually, I was the proud owner of a chain of lingerie stores that spanned from cozy little boutiques to swanky outlets. Work was my life, and I was good at it, damn good. But you know how it goes, after stacking up those hours, days, and months into a neat pile of success, I started feeling like there was something missing. That's when Michael came into the picture. It was just a ping on my phone at first, a friend request from a guy with a sharp suit and sharper eyes, judging from his profile picture. I didn't know him, but a quick peek through his profile showed a man who seemed to have it all together, a lawyer, which explained the fancy suit. Curiosity got the better of me, and I hit accept. It wasn't long before his first message popped up one evening while I was balancing my accounts. Michael. Hey Emma, thanks for accepting my request. Noticed we have a few friends in common. How's it going? Simple enough, right? But it was his follow-up messages that really got me. He was witty and had a way of making me laugh, even after a long day. I remember one night, we were chatting about something stupid, like the worst pickup lines we'd ever heard, and his humor just clicked with me. Michael, ever had this one? Are you a magician? Because whenever I look at you, everyone else disappears. Bet you heard that one in your line of work. Emma, oh, for sure, top of the cringe chart. My comeback? Are you a photographer? Because I really want to lead this shoot. He laughed, or at least, he typed out a laugh. Hard to tell, but it felt genuine. After a few weeks of chatting, he suggested meeting up in person. Just a casual coffee, to put a real face to the text, he said. It sounded good to me. The first time we met, it was at this little dive that I loved, because they didn't skimp on the caffeine. He was already there when I walked in, scanning a newspaper. He looked up, and that sharp-eyed, professional profile picture did him no justice. He was better in the flesh. Emma? Wow, you actually look like your pictures. That's a rarity in this city. Well, thanks. I think you're not so bad yourself, despite the lawyer vibe. He laughed, and that icebreaker just melted away any awkwardness. We talked for hours. It wasn't just fluff either. Michael had depth. He asked about my business, my dreams, and listened, really listened, to what I had to say. The thing about Michael is, he never did anything by halves. When we'd been seeing each other for a year, he decided it was time to take things to the next level. I was closing up shop one chilly evening when he showed up unannounced, his breath misting in the cold air as he held out a small, velvet box. Emma, I've been thinking, he started, and boy, did he look nervous. We've been doing great, you and me. I think it's time we thought about making this a permanent deal. I froze, the keys to the store still in my hand. Michael, are you saying what I think you're saying? He cracked a smile, that charming, lopsided grin that always made my heart skip. Yeah, I am. Marry me, Emma. Let's not play around anymore. I want you as my partner, for good. My heart was racing, my mind spinning with 1,000 thoughts. Marriage? Was I ready? But looking into his eyes, seeing the earnestness there, it felt right. Yes, I breathed out. Yes, I'll marry you. But then he shifted, his expression turning serious again. There's something else, though. We need to talk about some legal stuff. Prenup stuff. The word prenup hit me like a bucket of ice water. Prenup? Really, Michael? Is that necessary? He hurried to explain, holding my hands in his to stop them from trembling. Listen, it's not that I don't trust you, Emma. It's just practical, especially with me being a lawyer. I've seen too many messy splits not to be cautious. Plus, it's going to protect both of us. What kind of protection are we talking about here? I asked, my voice a mix of curiosity and concern. Michael pulled out some papers from his briefcase. It's straightforward. If either of us cheats, the cheater loses their assets to the other. Simple and fair. You know I wouldn't cheat on you, Emma. This is just a safety net. I took a deep breath, trying to process it all. The romantic proposal now tangled up with talk of cheating and assets. It wasn't how I pictured my engagement. But then, life with Michael wasn't ordinary, and maybe this was just another part of that. I looked down at the papers, then back at his face, reading the sincerity there. Alright, I'll think about it. But let me be clear, Michael, I'm not planning to ever give you a reason to use this against me. That's all I'm asking for, he replied, relief washing over his face. We went out to celebrate that night, and despite the weird mix of emotions, the evening was perfect. The restaurant was cozy, the food delicious, and Michael was attentive, making me laugh and forget about the legalities for a few hours. Later, as we walked back to the car under the stars, Michael stopped and pulled me close. You know I love you, right? No piece of paper's gonna change that. I nodded, resting my head against his chest. I know, Michael. I love you too. Just, let's make sure this prenup thing doesn't mess us up, okay? He kissed the top of my head. It won't. Promise. And that was it. I signed the prenup a few days later, after reading it over with my own lawyer, just to be sure. It felt weird, signing a document that talked about the end of a marriage when ours hadn't even begun. But love's a gamble, and I was all in. I just hoped my bet on Michael was the right one. We were the couple everyone envied, always laughing and whispering to each other at parties. But a few months in, things started to change. It wasn't something I could put my finger on right away, just a chill that settled over us slowly. The real trouble started a few weeks later. We were out shopping, and I was looking for some new scents in a perfume shop. I chatted with the sales guy, just casual talk about fragrances. When we left the store, Michael was fuming. Who was that? He barked as soon as we were clear of the crowded mall. I was taken aback. The sales guy? I was just asking him about the perfumes. Why? Seemed like you were really into him, Michael shot back, his eyes hard. Are you serious right now? I stopped walking, staring at him in disbelief. I was talking about perfumes, Michael. What's gotten into you? He scoffed, shaking his head as he started walking again. Nothing. Forget it. Let's just go home. But it didn't stop there. It got worse. Anytime I talked to a man, Michael would sulk or make snide comments. He became colder at home, too, retreating behind his laptop or phone, leaving me to eat dinner alone most nights. One evening, I decided to confront him. I couldn't stand the icy atmosphere anymore. I found him in his study, staring blankly at a spreadsheet. Michael, we need to talk, I said, standing in the doorway. He didn't look up. About? About us. About how you've been acting lately. I walked over and closed the laptop in front of him. You've been distant, and any time I interact with another guy, you act like I've committed some crime. He rubbed his temples, sighing heavily. Emma, you don't understand the pressure I'm under at work. And when I see you, laughing and chatting with other men, it gets to me, okay? And sometimes, I feel like you don't respect our relationship enough to keep your distance. We stared at each other, the air thick with unsaid things, and the echo of our raised voices. But then, something new stirred the pot. Rumors from friends started trickling in, saying Michael had been telling people I was a flirt, chatting up other men whenever he turned his back. I couldn't believe it. You've been talking about me behind my back? Telling people I flirt with other guys? Look, Emma, it's not like that. I might have said something here or there, but it's only because I see how they look at you, how you. Stop. I cut him off, my anger peaking. I don't believe this. You have no right to spread lies about me. You're supposed to be my partner, Michael, not my biggest critic. After that last big fight, things between Michael and me cooled off a bit. One morning, I found a note from Michael on the kitchen counter. His handwriting, usually so precise, looked rushed this time. I picked it up, my heart pounding a little harder than usual. Emma, let's try to start over. Meet me at the Grandview Hotel, room 204, at 8 p.m. tonight. Let's put the past behind us and move forward. M. I stared at the note for a long minute. This was unexpected. Maybe this was his way of reaching out, trying to mend things. I decided to go, hope fluttering in my chest like a fragile bird. The day dragged by. Work was a blur. I couldn't focus on the customer orders or the inventory. My mind kept drifting back to the note, to what the evening might bring. Could we really start over? By the time I shut the shop and headed to the hotel, I was a bundle of nerves. When I arrived at the Grandview, my palms were sweaty. I checked my reflection in the car mirror, fixed my hair, dabbed on a bit of lipstick. Not too much. I didn't want to look like I was trying too hard. Room 204 was on the second floor. The hallway was quiet, just the soft hum of the air conditioning. I knocked. No answer. I knocked again, then, with a hesitant hand, turned the doorknob. It was open. The room was dimly lit by a bedside lamp, casting long shadows across the bed. There was an open bottle of wine on the table, 2 glasses beside it, and a small plate of fruit slices. But no Michael. Michael? I called out, stepping inside, letting the door click shut behind me. Are you here? Silence. Just the soft whir of the air conditioner. I thought about leaving, but then I decided to wait. I poured myself a glass of wine, the red liquid swirling in the glass. Just one glass, I muttered to myself, to calm the nerves. I took a sip, the wine rich and a little too sweet. I sat down on the edge of the bed, my mind racing. The wine was starting to make my head a bit fuzzy, or was it my nerves? I lay back, just to rest my eyes for a moment. The room spun gently, and then everything went black. When I woke up, it was dark outside. I tried to sit up, but my head was pounding, and my thoughts were foggy. My phone was on the nightstand. I grabbed it, the light from the screen blindingly bright in the dim room. I checked the time. It was past midnight. Panic clawed at my chest. I tried to remember what happened, how I ended up lying here, but it was like grasping at smoke. I realized with a start that I was not dressed, lying there without my clothes. I called Michael, my fingers trembling as I dialed his number. The phone rang, then, his voice, cold and distant. Emma? What's up? Michael, where are you? Why didn't you come to the hotel? I asked, my voice shaking. Hotel? What are you talking about, Emma? Are you drunk? Have you lost your mind? I'm at the Grandview, like you told me. Why did you ask me to come here if you weren't going to show up? My voice rose in anger and confusion. Emma, I don't know what sick game you're playing, but I didn't write any note. I've been home all night. You're out of control, running around with your lovers. I even thought about calling the police. Driving home from that disastrous night at the hotel, my mind was in turmoil. Michael's cold, dismissive voice on the phone replayed over and over in my head. What was happening? It felt like I was being sucked into a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. As I pulled into the driveway, the familiar sight of our home brought no comfort, only a knot of dread in my stomach. I stepped inside, and the tension hit me like a wave. Michael was pacing the living room, his face twisted in anger. As soon as he saw me, he exploded. "There you are! The wandering wife returns," he yelled, his voice dripping with scorn. "Michael, please, we need to talk. Something very wrong happened tonight," I pleaded, my voice shaky but desperate to make him understand. But he wasn't listening. Instead, he slammed a stack of photos on the table. "Explain these then," he shouted. I picked up the photos, my hands trembling. They showed me in a hotel room, in bed with a man I had never seen before. My heart sank. "Michael, I don't know who this is. I swear, I've never seen this man before. Something happened to me tonight, something I can't explain." He laughed, a harsh, mocking sound that sent shivers down my spine. "A monstrous mistake? Or just your monstrous behavior? Marrying you was the real mistake." I felt tears prick my eyes, but I fought them back, needing to stay strong, to stay clear-headed. "I didn't do this, Michael. You have to believe me." But he wasn't done. "Believe you? Why should I? You're a liar and a cheat. And I'll make sure you don't get a cent from me. I'm going to court, and I will take everything from you, as per our agreement," he spat out before grabbing his suitcase, already packed, and heading for the door. With a final glare, he slammed the door behind him, leaving me alone in the echoing silence of the house. I collapsed on the couch, my body shaking. The pain in my head was relentless, throbbing with an intensity that made it hard to think. But it was more than just a headache, it felt like my brain was foggy, my memories of the night blurred and inconsistent. That's when it hit me, the wine. I had only one glass, but the dizziness and the blackout didn't make sense. It was too extreme, too sudden. I grabbed my phone and dialed my friend Lisa, a nurse, hoping she could shed some light on my symptoms. "Lisa, something's not right." I had a glass of wine, and then everything went black. I woke up hours later, and now Michael has these photos. "It doesn't add up," I explained hurriedly, my words tumbling out. There was a pause on the other end as Lisa digested my words. "Emma, it sounds like you might have been drugged. You need to get to a hospital or a lab and get tested right now. Tell them what happened, especially about the wine and your symptoms." The drive to the lab was a blur, my thoughts racing as I tried to piece everything together. At the lab, I explained the situation to the technician, who nodded solemnly and took several vials.